The silent stare. It's an age-old tactic, a primal display of dominance that transcends language. At its core, it's about wielding power through unwavering, often uncomfortable eye contact. More than just looking, it involves a focused, intense gaze intended to unsettle, control, and ultimately intimidate the recipient. The power lies not just in the act itself, but in the violation of social norms surrounding eye contact. Normally, we engage in a dance of gazes. We make eye contact briefly, then look away to signal respect, disinterest, or simply to allow space for the other person. The silent stare breaks this unspoken agreement. It holds the gaze for an extended period, often accompanied by a lack of other facial expressions, creating a void that the other person instinctively tries to fill, usually with discomfort or a feeling of being judged. The mechanism behind its effectiveness is rooted in several psychological principles. Firstly, extended eye contact triggers the amygdala, the brain's fear center. This activates the fight or flight response, putting the recipient on edge and making them more susceptible to suggestion or coercion. This response is heightened by the ambiguity of the stare. Without verbal cues or other body language signals, the recipient is left to interpret the meaning of the gaze, often projecting their own anxieties and insecurities onto the situation. This creates a power imbalance. The starer controls the narrative by withholding information, forcing the other person to guess their intentions. Secondly, the silent stare asserts dominance by demonstrating a lack of concern for the other person's comfort. It signals a willingness to flout social rules and to impose one's will. This is particularly effective in hierarchical relationships or situations where power dynamics are already at play. Think of a stern head teacher confronting a misbehaving student or a police officer questioning a suspect. The unwavering gaze can break down resistance and elicit compliance. Consider this hypothetical scenario, a negotiation between two business partners. One, known for their sharp intellect and unwavering resolve, maintains a consistent, intense stare throughout the meeting, rarely blinking and offering minimal verbal responses. The other partner, more accustomed to collaborative dialogue, finds themselves increasingly flustered and anxious. They stumble over their words, feel pressure to concede points, and ultimately agree to terms less favorable than they initially intended. The silent stare, coupled with the established reputation for competence, has tipped the scales in favor of the other partner. In contrast, think of a mother using the silent stare on her child. The unspoken disappointment or disapproval conveyed through a sustained gaze can be a powerful deterrent, especially when combined with a history of loving and supportive interactions. The child understands the implicit message, "I am disappointed in you, and I expect better." This use of the silent stare is often more effective than yelling or punishment, as it appeals to the child's sense of empathy and desire for approval. However, the silent stare is not without its risks. If used inappropriately or aggressively, it can be perceived as threatening or even psychotic. It can escalate tensions and lead to confrontation, especially if the recipient feels cornered or disrespected. Furthermore, its effectiveness diminishes if the starer lacks credibility or if their gaze appears unfocused or uncertain. The power lies in the conviction behind the eyes, not just the act of staring itself. Ultimately, the silent stare is a potent tool of nonverbal communication, capable of conveying a range of emotions and exerting significant influence. Understanding its mechanisms and potential impact is crucial for navigating complex social interactions and recognizing when this subtle but powerful psychological mind game is being deployed. Indirect aggression, the passive-aggressive attack, is a subtle yet potent form of psychological manipulation, a veiled hostility that undermines relationships and erodes trust. Unlike overt aggression, which is direct and easily identifiable, passive aggression operates under the radar, cloaked in ambiguity and often masked by seemingly innocuous behavior. At its core, it's an expression of anger or resentment that is not directly acknowledged, but rather manifested through indirect, often subversive means. The mechanism behind passive aggression stems from a difficulty in expressing negative emotions directly. This can be rooted in childhood experiences where expressing anger was punished or suppressed, leading to the development of alternative, less confrontational coping mechanisms. Individuals employing this tactic may fear conflict, rejection, or the vulnerability that comes with openly admitting their feelings. Instead of saying, "I'm angry because you didn't help with the dishes," they might deliberately do a poor job of washing them themselves, sighing loudly and making pointed comments about how they always have to do everything. The motivations behind passive-aggressive behavior are complex and varied. Sometimes it's a power play, a way to exert control in situations where the individual feels powerless. Delaying tactics, such as procrastinating on a task requested by a superior, can be a subtle form of rebellion against perceived authority. Other times, it's a defense mechanism against feeling overwhelmed or inadequate. Sarcasm, another common tool, can deflect criticism and mask underlying insecurities. The sarcastic individual might make a cutting remark disguised as a joke, dismissing any negative reactions with a flippant "can't you take a joke?" Examples of passive aggression are plentiful in everyday life. Consider the colleague who consistently forgets to include someone on important emails, or the partner who agrees to do a chore, but does it so poorly that it needs to be redone. The friend who always arrives late to gatherings, offering a flimsy excuse while knowing it disrupts the plans, is another prime example. These actions, while seemingly minor, carry a significant emotional weight. They are designed to frustrate, irritate, and ultimately punish the target. The impact of passive-aggressive behavior can be devastating to relationships. The constant undercurrent of negativity erodes trust and creates a climate of anxiety and uncertainty. The target often feels confused and gaslight, unsure whether their perception of the situation is accurate. Because the aggression is indirect, it's difficult to address directly. Confronting the perpetrator often leads to denial, defensiveness, or accusations of being overly sensitive. This makes it challenging to resolve conflicts and fosters resentment on both sides. Over time, the constant emotional drain can lead to burnout, depression, and even the dissolution of the relationship. The insidious nature of passive aggression lies in its ability to slowly poison the well, leaving the target feeling confused, frustrated, and emotionally depleted, all while the perpetrator maintains plausible deniability. The lack of direct confrontation makes it exceptionally difficult to address and resolve, perpetuating a cycle of negativity and eroding the foundation of healthy communication. False equivalence, also known as comparing apples to oranges, is a cognitive distortion and a rhetorical device that attempts to create a semblance of logical connection between two or more things that are actually dissimilar and shouldn't be compared in the first place. It presents two vastly different concepts, situations, or objects as possessing the same value or significance, thus misleading the audience into believing a false or skewed conclusion. The core mechanism behind false equivalence lies in highlighting a superficial similarity between the disparate items while ignoring their fundamental differences. It's a manipulation that relies on the human tendency to seek patterns and connections, even where they don't genuinely exist. This can be achieved through selective presentation of facts, exaggerating minor similarities, or completely overlooking crucial distinctions. Essentially, it builds a bridge of perceived sameness where none structurally or logically exists. Consider this hypothetical scenario. A politician argues that regulating greenhouse gas emissions is just as detrimental to the economy as allowing widespread pollution. The argument hinges on the premise that both actions, regulation and inaction, have negative economic consequences. However, this comparison is deeply flawed. While regulation might incur immediate costs for businesses, uncontrolled pollution leads to long-term environmental degradation, public health crises, and potentially irreversible economic damage, far outweighing the initial investment in sustainable practices. The equivalence ignores the scale, scope, and long-term implications of each action, presenting a false choice between two unequal evils. Another common example is the comparison of violence in video games to violence in real life. Proponents of the argument might point to studies suggesting a correlation between playing violent video games and aggressive behavior. However, a correlation doesn't equal causation. A multitude of other factors, such as socioeconomic background, mental health, family dynamics, and exposure to real-world violence, contribute to aggressive behavior. To equate playing a virtual game with committing a real-world act of violence oversimplifies a complex issue and ignores the numerous confounding variables at play. The context, intention, and consequences are vastly different, rendering the comparison a false equivalence. The impact of false equivalence can be significant. It obscures meaningful discussions, impedes critical thinking, and allows misleading information to proliferate. In political discourse, it can be used to justify inaction on crucial issues or to promote harmful policies by framing them as equivalent to less desirable alternatives. In advertising, it can manipulate consumers into purchasing products by falsely equating them with higher quality or more reputable brands. In personal relationships, it can lead to misunderstandings and conflict as individuals fail to recognize the unique circumstances and perspectives of others. Recognizing false equivalence requires a keen eye for detail and a commitment to critical thinking. It demands questioning the underlying assumptions of any comparison and carefully evaluating the relevant differences between the things being compared. Ask yourself, are the similarities being emphasized superficial, while the differences are fundamental? Are the consequences of each option being accurately and fully represented? Is the context being considered? By engaging in this kind of rigorous analysis, you can inoculate yourself against the persuasive power of false equivalence and make more informed decisions based on sound reasoning and evidence. Remember, not all comparisons are created equal. The straw man fallacy, attacking a weak argument. It's a rhetorical sleight of hand, a deceptive tactic where, instead of grappling with a real argument being presented, you construct a distorted, weaker version of it. A straw man, easily knocked down and discredited. Think of it as a debate shortcut taken by those more interested in winning than in genuine understanding. The mechanism is subtle, often cloaked in the language of agreement or clarification. It begins with hearing an opposing viewpoint. Instead of dissecting its merits, you select a part, often a simplified or exaggerated element, and build a caricature around it. This caricature then becomes the target of your attack. The original, more nuanced argument is conveniently bypassed, leaving your audience with the impression that you've successfully refuted the core proposition when, in reality, you've only dismantled a flimsy imitation. Consider this hypothetical scenario. Person A argues for increased funding for public schools, citing improved student outcomes and societal benefits as potential results. Person B, instead of addressing the merits of this argument, might respond with, "So, you're saying we should throw endless amounts of money at schools with no accountability? You want to bankrupt the city and force everyone to pay exorbitant taxes just to fund failing institutions." See what happened? Person B hasn't engaged with the actual argument for improved education. They've constructed a straw man, the idea that person A wants limitless, unaccountable spending, bankrupting the city in the process. This extreme and easily refuted position bears little resemblance to person A's original, likely more reasonable, proposition. The appeal of the straw man fallacy lies in its ease of execution. It's often easier to dismantle a simplified, distorted version of an argument than to confront the complexities of the original. Furthermore, it can be a highly effective tool for swaying public opinion, particularly when dealing with complex or emotionally charged issues. Its impact can be devastating on productive dialogue. It fosters misunderstanding, polarization, and a breakdown of meaningful exchange. When individuals resort to attacking straw men, they effectively shut down the possibility of genuine engagement and mutual understanding. It prevents any true exploration of the original argument, as the focus shifts to demolishing the fabricated version. It creates an environment of distrust, where reasoned discourse is replaced by combative rhetoric, leaving both sides further entrenched in their respective positions. In the political arena, the strawman fallacy is rampant. A politician advocating for universal health care might be accused of wanting to nationalize the entire healthcare system, stripping individuals of their freedom of choice. This is a straw man because the original proposal likely involves a more nuanced approach, perhaps a public option alongside private insurance, rather than a complete government takeover. Even in everyday conversations, the straw man rears its head. Someone suggesting we eat healthier might be met with the response, "So you want us to live on lettuce and tofu for the rest of our lives and never enjoy delicious food again?" This extreme interpretation completely misrepresents the original suggestion for moderate dietary improvements. Recognizing the straw man is crucial for navigating the treacherous waters of argumentation and debate. Look for instances where the opposing argument is presented in an overly simplified, exaggerated, or distorted manner. Ask yourself, is this a fair representation of the original viewpoint? Is the person attacking an actual argument or a caricature of it? By cultivating this critical awareness, you can protect yourself from being misled and contribute to more meaningful and productive discussions. The cost of falling for the straw man is a distorted reality, fueled by misrepresentation, that prevents any possibility of reaching understanding or finding common ground. Motivated reasoning, in its most insidious form, manifests as cherry-picking evidence. It's not simply about being biased. It's about actively and often unconsciously selecting and emphasizing information that confirms pre-existing beliefs while simultaneously ignoring or downplaying contradictory evidence, no matter how compelling. Imagine a detective convinced of a suspect's guilt. They might fixate on circumstantial details that paint the suspect in a negative light, while dismissing alibis or exculpatory evidence as insignificant anomalies or cleverly constructed lies. This isn't necessarily malicious. It's a cognitive shortcut, a defense mechanism against the discomfort of cognitive dissonance. The core mechanism hinges on emotional investment. When we hold strong beliefs, particularly those tied to our identity, self-esteem, or social standing, we become emotionally invested in their validity. Disconfirming evidence threatens that investment, creating a state of psychological unease. To alleviate this discomfort, the mind actively seeks out information that supports the pre-existing belief, acting like a lawyer building a case for a predetermined verdict. This selective filtering happens both consciously and unconsciously. We might spend hours online searching for articles and studies that confirm our views, while conveniently scrolling past those that challenge them. We might also subconsciously assign more weight to confirming evidence, perceiving it as more credible or relevant, while nitpicking and scrutinizing contradictory information for flaws. Consider the anti-vaccination movement. Despite overwhelming scientific consensus supporting the safety and efficacy of vaccines, proponents often latch onto isolated studies with questionable methodology, anecdotal evidence of adverse reactions, or conspiracy theories perpetuated online. They meticulously dissect any pro-vaccine argument, highlighting perceived flaws or inconsistencies, while readily accepting any evidence that supports their pre-existing belief, regardless of its scientific validity. This isn't necessarily a lack of intelligence. It's motivated reasoning and action, driven by a deep-seated fear or distrust of the medical establishment, or a belief in personal autonomy over public health. The emotional investment in these beliefs makes it incredibly difficult to engage in rational discourse or to consider alternative perspectives. The impact of cherry-picking evidence can be devastating, particularly in areas of public policy and personal relationships. In politics, it can lead to the polarization of opinions and the inability to find common ground. Each side selectively highlights statistics and anecdotes that support their platform, while ignoring or downplaying the concerns of the opposition. This creates an echo chamber where beliefs are reinforced and dissenting voices are silenced. In personal relationships, it can manifest as a refusal to acknowledge one's own flaws or to listen to the concerns of a partner. A partner might only remember instances where they felt wronged, overlooking instances of kindness or support, leading to resentment and conflict. Overcoming this bias requires conscious effort. It involves actively seeking out diverse perspectives, questioning our own assumptions, and critically evaluating all evidence, regardless of whether it confirms or challenges our beliefs. It also requires acknowledging the emotional component of belief formation and being willing to tolerate the discomfort of cognitive dissonance. It demands intellectual humility, the recognition that we might be wrong, and the willingness to change our minds in the face of compelling evidence. Essentially, it requires a commitment to truth-seeking over confirmation bias. The bandwagon effect, a potent and often insidious psychological phenomenon, describes our tendency to adopt behaviors, styles, or attitudes simply because they are popular and widespread. It's the invisible force that compels us to jump on the bandwagon, even when our initial inclination might have been to remain on the sidelines. At its core, this effect stems from a deep-seated desire to fit in, to avoid social isolation, and to be perceived as normal or accepted. We are, after all, social creatures wired for connection and belonging. The mechanism behind the bandwagon effect is multifaceted. One key element is informational influence. We often assume that if a large number of people are doing something, they must know something we don't. This is particularly true in situations characterized by uncertainty or ambiguity. Imagine you're in a new city trying to choose a restaurant. You see two options. One is bustling with customers, the other is nearly empty. You're more likely to choose the busy restaurant, assuming that the crowd signals superior food or service. You're essentially using the actions of others as a heuristic, a mental shortcut to make a decision. Another crucial component is normative influence. This arises from our desire to be liked and accepted by others. We conform to group norms, even if we privately disagree with them, to avoid being ostracized or facing social disapproval. This explains why trends, fads, and viral challenges gain such momentum. Someone might initially be skeptical of a new fashion trend, but eventually succumb to it for fear of appearing outdated or out of touch. The social cost of standing apart becomes too high. Political campaigns are masters of exploiting the bandwagon effect. They frequently highlight polling data showing their candidate in the lead, aiming to convince undecided voters that supporting the winning side is the smart choice. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. As more people believe a candidate is likely to win, more people support them, reinforcing the initial perception. Similarly, in financial markets, the bandwagon effect can fuel speculative bubbles. Investors see stock prices rising and, fearing they'll miss out on potential gains, rush to buy, driving prices even higher, often beyond any rational valuation. This frenzy continues until the bubble inevitably bursts, leaving latecomers with substantial losses. Furthermore, the rise of social media has amplified the bandwagon effect exponentially. The visibility of likes, shares, and comments creates a powerful feedback loop. Content that is already popular gains even more traction, simply because it appears to be popular. This can lead to echo chambers, where individuals are primarily exposed to information that confirms their existing beliefs, further reinforcing the bandwagon effect and making it difficult to consider alternative perspectives. Consider the spread of misinformation online. If a false story is widely shared, individuals may be more likely to believe it, even if they have reason to be skeptical, simply because it aligns with what seems to be the prevailing narrative. The implications of the bandwagon effect are far-reaching. It can lead to herd mentality, poor decision-making, and the suppression of dissent. It can stifle innovation and creativity, as people are less likely to challenge the status quo. While conformity is sometimes necessary for social cohesion, unchecked bandwagoning can be detrimental to individual autonomy and critical thinking. Understanding the mechanisms behind this psychological phenomenon is the first step toward mitigating its negative consequences and making more informed, independent choices. Playing devil's advocate, at its surface, seems like a harmless intellectual exercise, a playful prodding of ideas, a challenge to assumptions, all in the name of arriving at a more robust and well-considered conclusion. However, when wielded with intention, it can become a subtle but potent psychological tool for seeding discord and doubt, undermining confidence, and disrupting group dynamics. The core mechanism hinges on presenting a counter-argument, often extreme or unpopular, to an accepted premise. The devil's advocate doesn't necessarily believe in the argument they are presenting. Their purpose is to force others to defend their position, expose weaknesses in their reasoning, and ultimately, introduce uncertainty where it may not have existed before. The effectiveness lies in the fact that continuous, relentless challenges, even when founded on weak arguments, can wear down even the most steadfast convictions. Imagine a team of researchers working on a groundbreaking new theory. Initially, they're united in their belief and confident in their data. Then, a single member starts consistently playing devil's advocate. They question every aspect of the methodology, highlight potential flaws in the analysis, and relentlessly poke holes in their conclusions. They might even use emotionally charged language to amplify their doubts, even if subtly. Are we sure about this? Because if we're wrong, the repercussions could be significant. Over time, this persistent negativity can erode the team's confidence, leading to internal conflicts, second-guessing, and a slowdown in progress. The initial sense of unity and shared purpose is replaced by anxiety and self-doubt. The impact is amplified when the devil's advocate is perceived as an authority figure or someone with expertise in a related field. Their skepticism carries more weight, making it harder to dismiss their challenges. Consider a senior executive constantly questioning the marketing team's strategy. Even if the strategy is sound, the executive's persistent doubt, phrased as just playing devil's advocate, can instill fear and uncertainty, leading the team to abandon a potentially successful approach simply to avoid further scrutiny. This dynamic is particularly corrosive because it masks manipulative behavior under the guise of constructive criticism. The individual engaging in the tactic can easily deny any malicious intent, claiming they were simply trying to ensure all angles were considered. Another crucial aspect is the asymmetry of effort. It's far easier to tear down an argument than to build one up. The devil's advocate benefits from this asymmetry. They can raise endless objections, forcing others to expend significant energy defending their position, while they themselves bear little responsibility for constructing a coherent alternative. This imbalance can be exhausting and demoralizing, particularly if the devil's advocate employs rhetorical techniques designed to obfuscate rather than clarify. The consequences extend beyond the immediate situation. Repeated exposure to this kind of adversarial environment can lead to a generalized distrust of others' intentions. Individuals may become more guarded and less willing to share their ideas, fearing they will be subjected to relentless criticism. This can stifle creativity and innovation, creating a culture of fear and suspicion. Furthermore, it can impact personal relationships as the targeted individual starts to anticipate and project similar challenges and skepticism in other contexts. The insidious nature of this tactic is that it doesn't leave visible scars, but its psychological impact can be profound and long-lasting, damaging trust, confidence, and the ability to collaborate effectively. The devil's advocate can, in reality, be a skilled manipulator fostering an environment ripe with unease and, ultimately, control. Virtue signaling, the performance of morality. It's not about being virtuous, necessarily, but about appearing virtuous. Think of it as moral peacocking, a display designed to attract attention and approval, often at little to no actual cost to the performer. At its core, virtue signaling is driven by a desire for social capital. We are, after all, social creatures. We crave belonging, acceptance, and status. By publicly aligning ourselves with widely held moral beliefs, we signal to others that we are good people, worthy of inclusion in their social circles. The mechanism is simple: public declaration of a moral stance, often accompanied by actions designed to reinforce that declaration and the expectation of reciprocal validation from others. The internet age has amplified virtue signaling exponentially. Social media platforms provide the perfect stage for grand pronouncements of moral superiority. Consider the hashtag activism phenomenon. A user might change their profile picture to show solidarity with a cause, tweet a condemning statement about an injustice, or share an article highlighting a social problem. While these actions can genuinely contribute to awareness, they can also be empty gestures, performative displays that require minimal effort but generate maximum social reward. The retweet, the like, the positive comment. These serve as the currency of online virtue signaling. The key characteristic that separates genuine virtue from virtue signaling lies in the cost-benefit analysis. True virtue often requires sacrifice, personal risk, or significant effort. Virtue signaling, on the other hand, is typically low cost and high reward. For example, a politician might publicly denounce a controversial policy, knowing that it will resonate with their base and bolster their approval ratings, even if they lack the power or intention to actually change that policy. Or consider a company that launches a limited edition product supporting a social cause, generating positive PR while simultaneously increasing sales and profit margins. Hypothetically, imagine a wealthy individual consistently posting about the importance of environmental sustainability on social media, urging others to reduce their carbon footprint. They fly exclusively on private jets, own multiple gas-guzzling vehicles, and live in a massive, energy-inefficient mansion. This discrepancy between their stated beliefs and their actual behavior highlights the performative nature of their supposed virtue. The environmental advocacy serves more as a brand-building exercise than a genuine commitment to the cause. The impact of virtue signaling is complex and multifaceted. On one hand, it can raise awareness about important social issues, mobilize support for worthy causes, and shame individuals or institutions into behaving more ethically. The sheer volume of voices speaking out against injustice can create a powerful force for change. On the other hand, virtue signaling can be divisive, creating echo chambers where individuals compete to out-virtue each other, leading to increased polarization and social fragmentation. It can also be used to manipulate public opinion, distract from genuine problems, and silence dissenting voices. Moreover, the focus on performative displays can detract from meaningful action, creating a sense of moral complacency. If people feel they have done their part simply by posting a supportive message online, they may be less inclined to engage in more substantive forms of activism, such as volunteering, donating, or advocating for policy changes. It fosters a culture of moral posturing where the appearance of righteousness trumps actual commitment. Ultimately, discerning true virtue from mere virtue signaling requires careful observation, critical thinking, and a healthy dose of skepticism. We must look beyond the surface-level pronouncements and examine the underlying motivations, the consistency between words and actions, and the true cost being borne. The charismatic leader, the architect of a cult of personality, isn't simply popular. They cultivate devotion. It's a deliberate, often subconscious, manipulation of psychological vulnerabilities, forging an almost unbreakable bond between leader and followers. At its core, it's about fostering an environment where the leader is perceived not just as an authority figure, but as a savior, a visionary, or even something akin to a deity. The process begins with crafting a powerful, often simplistic, narrative. This narrative typically paints a stark picture of the world, identifying enemies, highlighting existing societal anxieties, and presenting the leader as the sole solution. This us versus them dynamic is crucial, creating a sense of urgency and shared purpose. The leader positions themselves as uniquely qualified to navigate this crisis, possessing insights and abilities that ordinary individuals lack. Central to this manipulation is the deliberate use of symbols and rituals. A specific uniform, a unique greeting, a repetitive slogan. These elements reinforce group identity and reinforce the leader's omnipresence. Rituals, whether elaborate ceremonies or simple, repeated acts of obedience, solidify loyalty, and create a sense of shared experience that binds followers together and to the leader. These practices aren't necessarily religious in nature, but they often evoke a similar feeling of reverence and belonging. The charismatic leader excels at projecting an image of unwavering confidence and conviction, even in the face of adversity. They master the art of public speaking, employing emotionally charged language, grand pronouncements, and carefully choreographed gestures to captivate their audience. They often use rhetorical devices like repetition, metaphors, and anecdotes to reinforce their message and connect with their followers on an emotional level, bypassing critical thinking. Another key element is the control of information. The charismatic leader often isolates their followers from dissenting opinions and external influences, creating an echo chamber where their narrative is constantly reinforced. This can involve controlling media access, suppressing criticism, and even physically isolating followers from family and friends who might question the leader's authority. This isolation fosters dependence and reinforces the perception of the leader as the sole source of truth. Consider the hypothetical example of a self-proclaimed spiritual guru who gains a following by claiming to possess ancient knowledge that can unlock hidden potential. They establish a secluded retreat, dress in distinctive robes, and preach a message of personal transformation through strict adherence to their teachings. Followers are encouraged to sever ties with their past lives, donate their possessions to the guru, and spend their days engaged in repetitive chants and rituals. Criticism is swiftly silenced, and any doubts are attributed to a lack of faith. The guru's pronouncements are treated as gospel, and their authority is absolute. The impact of a cult of personality can be devastating. Followers often sacrifice their autonomy, their finances, and even their lives in service of the leader's vision. Critical thinking is suppressed, dissent is punished, and individual identity is subsumed by the collective. The result can be a dangerous and unstable social environment, ripe for exploitation and abuse. The charismatic leader, in their pursuit of power and adulation, can inflict profound and lasting damage on the lives of their followers and the wider community. Learned helplessness. It's not about being inherently weak or lacking resilience. It's about being systematically conditioned to believe you are. It's a psychological minefield, a subtle yet devastating form of manipulation where someone is trained to give up, to accept their fate, no matter how dire, because they've learned that their actions have no impact. Think of it like this. Imagine a dog in a cage. The experiment, conducted by psychologist Martin Seligman, involved administering electric shocks to the dog. Initially, the dog could escape the shocks by jumping over a low barrier. But then, the barrier was raised, making escape impossible. The dog tried, struggled, yelped, but ultimately failed to avoid the shocks. The crucial part came later. The barrier was lowered back to its original height, making escape easy again. But the dog, it didn't even try. It simply lay down and whimpered, passively accepting the shocks. It had learned that its actions were futile. It had learned to be helpless. This seemingly cruel experiment demonstrated a profound psychological principle. Learned helplessness occurs when an individual repeatedly experiences negative events that they cannot control. Over time, they begin to believe that their actions have no effect on their environment and that they are powerless to change their circumstances. This belief then generalizes to other situations, even when escape or control is possible. The mechanism behind learned helplessness lies in the disruption of the brain's reward system. When we take action and achieve a positive outcome, our brains release dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and motivation. This dopamine surge reinforces the connection between our actions and the desired outcome, encouraging us to repeat those actions in the future. However, when we repeatedly experience failure and a lack of control, this reward system becomes suppressed. The brain stops releasing dopamine in response to our efforts, leading to a sense of apathy and resignation. The impact of learned helplessness can be profound. It's a key factor in depression. Individuals who feel trapped in situations they can't control, abusive relationships, dead-end jobs, chronic illness, are more likely to develop depressive symptoms. They may lose motivation, experience feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness, and withdraw from social interactions. But learned helplessness isn't confined to extreme situations. It can creep into our lives in subtle ways. Consider a student who consistently receives negative feedback on their assignments, regardless of how hard they try. They might eventually stop trying altogether, believing that they're simply incapable of succeeding. Or think of an employee who is constantly micromanaged and criticized by their boss. They may become passive and unmotivated, afraid to take initiative or offer suggestions, convinced that their efforts will be met with disapproval. The insidious thing about learned helplessness is that it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. When we believe we are powerless, we are less likely to take action, even when opportunities for change arise. This inaction then reinforces our belief in our own helplessness, creating a vicious cycle. Breaking free from learned helplessness requires a conscious effort to challenge our negative beliefs and regain a sense of control. It involves identifying the situations where we feel helpless and actively seeking out opportunities to experience success, no matter how small. It might mean setting achievable goals, practicing self-compassion, and seeking support from others. It also means recognizing when manipulative tactics are being used to induce this state and actively resisting the conditioning. It's about retraining the brain, reestablishing the connection between action and outcome, and reclaiming our power to shape our own lives. The Pygmalion effect, named after the Greek sculptor who fell in love with his own creation and willed it to life, usually refers to the power of positive expectations. But its shadow side, the negative Pygmalion effect or the golem effect, is a much more insidious manipulation, subtly chipping away at potential, stifling growth through the very act of diminishing belief. At its core, the negative Pygmalion effect operates on the principle that lowered expectations lead to lowered performance. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy in reverse, with a belief in someone's inadequacy, whether conscious or unconscious, translates into behaviors that actively hinder their success. Unlike outright sabotage, this is often more subtle, a pervasive undercurrent of doubt that erodes confidence and motivation. The mechanism is complex, playing out across multiple levels. First, there's the shift in input. When someone is perceived as less capable, they receive less challenging tasks, fewer opportunities for growth, and less mentoring. Think of a manager consistently assigning the least demanding projects to a particular employee, relegating them to routine tasks that offer no chance to stretch their skills. This restricted input inherently limits their ability to learn and improve. Next comes the change in output expectancy. If you believe someone is going to fail, you're less likely to invest in their success. This translates into less time spent providing constructive feedback, less patience when they struggle, and a general reluctance to support their development. Imagine a teacher who, based on a student's past performance or perceived social background, assumes they won't excel. The teacher may then provide less detailed explanations, avoid calling on them in class, and be less enthusiastic about their efforts, effectively communicating a lack of belief in their potential. This creates a toxic feedback loop. The lack of input and the lowered output expectancy, in turn, affect the individual's motivation and self-esteem. If someone is constantly told, implicitly or explicitly, that they are not good enough, they will eventually internalize that message. They may become less proactive, less willing to take risks, and less confident in their abilities, further reinforcing the negative expectations placed upon them. They might start exhibiting learned helplessness, giving up easily when faced with challenges, convinced that their efforts are futile. The impact can be devastating, especially on vulnerable individuals. Children in school, employees in the workplace, even individuals in relationships can all be victims of the negative Pygmalion effect. Consider a child repeatedly told they are not smart or not talented by their parents or teachers. Over time, this constant negativity can cripple their self-belief, leading to academic underachievement and a general lack of confidence in their abilities, shaping their entire future trajectory. The dangers of this effect are amplified when it becomes systemic. For instance, in certain professions or institutions, negative stereotypes about specific groups can lead to widespread underestimation of their potential. This can result in fewer opportunities, less support, and ultimately, lower performance, perpetuating a cycle of inequality and injustice. It's a subtle form of discrimination, masked as realistic assessment, but with far-reaching consequences. Ultimately, understanding the negative Pygmalion effect is crucial for fostering environments where everyone can thrive. It demands a conscious effort to challenge our own biases, cultivate genuine belief in the potential of others, and provide the necessary support and opportunities for them to succeed. Failing to do so not only limits individual growth, but also deprives society of the unique talents and contributions that each person has to offer. Cognitive priming. It's the whisper in your ear that shapes your choices before you even realize a choice was presented. It's the subtle nudge, the carefully placed cue that activates specific associations in your mind, influencing your subsequent thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. At its core, cognitive priming leverages the interconnectedness of our neural networks. Each concept, memory, or idea we hold is linked to others in a vast web within our brains. When one node in this network is activated, primed activation spreads to related nodes, making those associated concepts more accessible and likely to influence our responses. Think of it like a library. When a librarian pulls a particular book or a category of books out for display, those books become more visible and likely to be borrowed. Priming is the librarian of the mind, highlighting certain mental books and making them readily available. The mechanism is deceptively simple. Exposure to a stimulus, the prime, influences a subsequent, seemingly unrelated stimulus, the target. This influence manifests because the prime has activated related concepts in your memory, influencing how you perceive and respond to the target. The priming effect operates largely unconsciously. We are often unaware that we have been primed, and even less aware of the impact it's having on our decisions. Consider a classic experiment. Participants are briefly shown words related to the elderly, such as gray, bingo, or Florida. Afterward, they're timed walking down a hallway. Remarkably, those primed with elderly-related words tend to walk slower than those primed with neutral words. This happens without the participants consciously realizing they're walking slower or even that they were exposed to the priming words. The elderly-related primes activated stereotypes and associations related to slowness, subtly influencing their gait. The applications and potential manipulations are vast. In marketing, priming is a powerful tool. Subtly associating a product with positive emotions, trustworthiness, or success can increase sales. For example, playing classical music in a wine store has been shown to increase purchases of more expensive wines. The classical music primes associations with sophistication and quality, subtly influencing purchasing decisions. Priming extends beyond auditory or visual stimuli. Even smells can act as primes. The scent of cleanliness in a store can encourage customers to keep the space tidy, even if there are no explicit instructions to do so. Similarly, the aroma of freshly baked bread can create a sense of comfort and nostalgia, increasing the likelihood of customers purchasing food items. Hypothetically, imagine a negotiator subtly primed with images of powerful figures before entering a negotiation. The exposure, even subliminal, could subtly boost their confidence and assertiveness, leading to a more favorable outcome. Conversely, priming the opposing party with images associated with cooperation and compromise could soften their stance. However, it's crucial to acknowledge the ethical implications. The power of cognitive priming raises concerns about manipulation and the potential for influencing individuals without their conscious consent or awareness. While it can be used for positive purposes, encouraging healthier behaviors, promoting cooperation, or improving learning outcomes, it can also be exploited for unethical gains. Understanding the mechanics of cognitive priming empowers us to recognize and mitigate its potential misuse, while also harnessing its potential for good. Being aware of these subtle influences allows us to become more conscious consumers, more discerning decision-makers, and ultimately, more aware of the forces shaping our own thoughts and behaviors. Word salad, the confusion tactic. Imagine someone speaking, words flowing effortlessly, sentences forming, or so it seems. But listen closer. The words are there, the grammar might even be correct at times, but the meaning disintegrates into a chaotic jumble. This, in its essence, is word salad. It's a communication technique, sometimes deliberate, sometimes not, designed to overwhelm and confuse the listener, essentially shutting down critical thought through sheer linguistic bombardment. The core mechanism behind word salad lies in the disconnect between syntax and semantics. Syntax, the grammatical structure of language, provides the framework. Semantics, on the other hand, is the meaning carried by the words themselves and their arrangement. Word salad often retains enough syntactical correctness to lull the listener into a false sense of comprehension, even as the semantic content veers wildly off course. The listener's brain, constantly striving to extract meaning, becomes overloaded with nonsensical combinations, leading to frustration, disorientation, and ultimately, a cessation of active listening. The application of word salad as a deliberate tactic hinges on exploiting this cognitive overload. Imagine a politician facing a difficult question. Instead of providing a direct answer, they launch into a seemingly eloquent, yet ultimately meaningless, monologue. They might weave together buzzwords, half-formed concepts, and disconnected anecdotes, creating a verbal smokescreen that obscures the original issue. The listener, struggling to decipher the barrage of information, is less likely to press for a genuine response. This is especially effective in environments where appearing intelligent or informed is paramount, as calling out the speaker's incoherence risks appearing ignorant oneself. However, word salad isn't always a calculated manipulation. It's a recognized symptom of several mental health conditions, most notably schizophrenia. In these cases, the individual isn't intentionally trying to deceive. Their thought processes are genuinely disordered, resulting in fragmented and illogical speech patterns. Differentiating between malicious word salad and that stemming from mental illness requires careful observation of context, behavior, and other accompanying symptoms. Is there a history of manipulation? Is the individual displaying other signs of cognitive impairment, such as disorganized thought or hallucinations? These are crucial considerations. The impact of word salad, whether intentional or unintentional, can be profound. On the receiving end, it breeds distrust, frustration, and a sense of powerlessness. Being subjected to a barrage of nonsensical language can leave one feeling mentally exhausted and questioning their own understanding. In professional settings, word salad can undermine credibility and damage communication channels. In personal relationships, it can create a barrier to intimacy and understanding. Consider a hypothetical example. A manager confronted about a failed project responds with, "Well, you see, the synergistic paradigms were clearly misaligned, leading to a cascade of suboptimal deliverables within the Q3 framework, notwithstanding the dynamic interplay of cross-functional stakeholders and the projected scalability of agile methodologies, impacting, of course, the overall bottom line regarding key performance indicators, which, as we all know, are crucial for maximizing shareholder value in a highly competitive landscape. So, frankly, the responsibility lies across the board, impacting everyone. The words individually might make sense. The syntax is relatively sound, but the collection of phrases conveys no clear explanation of the project's failure or assignment of responsibility. It's a masterful demonstration of obfuscation, designed to deflect blame and avoid accountability. The listener is left bewildered, potentially accepting the non-answer simply to avoid further engagement with the bewildering linguistic maze. Understanding the mechanics of word salad allows us to recognize it in its various forms, whether it's a deliberate attempt to mislead or a manifestation of underlying mental health concerns. This awareness empowers us to challenge its use, demand clarity, and protect ourselves from its potentially damaging effects. It forces us to critically evaluate the language we hear and the intent behind it, ensuring that communication remains a vehicle for understanding rather than a tool for manipulation. Moving the goalposts. The insidious shifting of standards after an achievement has already been met, ensuring the target is perpetually out of reach. It's a psychological manipulation tactic, often employed unconsciously, that traps individuals in a relentless cycle of striving, leaving them perpetually feeling inadequate despite tangible successes. The core mechanism revolves around subtly raising expectations once a previous benchmark has been attained. It's not a blatant denial of accomplishment. Instead, it's a recalibration of what constitutes good enough, often framed with seemingly reasonable justifications. Imagine a young aspiring artist, Sarah. She dreams of exhibiting her work at a prestigious local gallery. She pours her heart and soul into her paintings, meticulously honing her skills. Finally, she achieves her goal. The gallery accepts her pieces, and the opening night is a resounding success. Friends, family, and art critics shower her with praise. However, instead of celebrating, Sarah finds herself riddled with anxiety. Her mentor, a well-meaning but unknowingly manipulative figure, remarks, "This is wonderful, Sarah, but to truly make a name for yourself, you need to exhibit at the national level. Local recognition is just a stepping stone." The goalposts have shifted. Sarah's initial victory, the culmination of years of effort, is now diminished, relegated to a mere preliminary step. The feeling of accomplishment is fleeting, replaced by the daunting prospect of an even more demanding objective. The problem with moving the goalposts isn't simply about setting ambitious goals. Healthy ambition is driven by internal motivation and a desire for personal growth. Moving the goalposts, on the other hand, is fueled by external validation and a fear of inadequacy. It hinges on an unspoken, often unconscious, belief that one is never truly there, never quite enough. This can manifest in various ways. In the workplace, a manager might commend an employee for exceeding their sales quota, only to immediately raise the quota for the next quarter, without any significant change in market conditions or resources. The employee is left feeling perpetually under pressure, regardless of their performance. In relationships, it could involve constantly criticizing a partner for minor flaws, even after they've made significant efforts to improve. A partner who initially expressed a desire for more romantic gestures might, after receiving them, then complain that the gestures aren't thoughtful enough or personal enough, essentially dismissing the efforts already made. The impact of this tactic is profound. It erodes self-esteem, fuels anxiety and depression, and can lead to burnout. Individuals trapped in this cycle struggle to derive genuine satisfaction from their achievements because the finish line is constantly being pushed further away. They internalize the message that their efforts are never quite sufficient, fostering a deep-seated sense of worthlessness. The constant striving becomes a source of stress, not joy. Furthermore, moving the goalposts creates a power dynamic. The person shifting the goalposts maintains control by setting the standards and judging the individual's performance against those ever-changing standards. This can be particularly damaging in hierarchical relationships, such as parent-child or employer-employee dynamics. Breaking free from this cycle requires recognizing the pattern. It involves consciously evaluating whether the new expectations are reasonable and achievable, or if they're simply a manifestation of someone else's, or one's own internalized, insecurities. It requires learning to celebrate achievements, to savor the feeling of accomplishment before immediately setting a new, potentially unattainable goal. It means prioritizing intrinsic motivation over external validation and defining success on one's own terms. It's about drawing a line in the sand and declaring, "This is enough. I am enough." Blame shifting, passing the buck of responsibility. It's a manipulation tactic as old as time, a psychological dodgeball where accountability is the ball and the shifters desperately try to avoid being hit. At its core, blame shifting is the art of redirecting responsibility for a mistake, failure, or undesirable outcome onto someone else, regardless of whether that someone else is actually at fault. It's not merely denying responsibility, it's actively transferring it. The mechanism behind blame shifting is often complex and layered with self-preservation instincts. Fear of punishment, social disapproval, or damage to one's self-image fuels the urge to deflect blame. Sometimes it's a conscious, calculated strategy. Other times, it's a more subconscious defense mechanism, a knee-jerk reaction designed to protect the ego. Regardless of the intent, the effect remains the same. Someone else bears the burden. Several techniques are employed in the blame shifter's arsenal. One common approach is outright denial, coupled with accusation. I didn't do it, and even if I did, it's because you told me to. This shifts the focus from the shifter's actions to the alleged instigation or incompetence of the target. Another tactic involves minimizing one's own role while exaggerating the contributions or failings of others. Yes, I was involved, but it was only a small part. The entire project failed because of their poor planning. This carefully crafted narrative paints the shifter as a minor player, absolving them of significant responsibility. A subtler form of blame shifting involves reframing the narrative. Instead of directly accusing someone, the shifter subtly alters the perception of events to place them in a more favorable light. For example, a manager might say, "The sales figures are down this quarter, but that's because the marketing team didn't generate enough leads." While not directly accusing the sales team, the statement subtly implies that their performance is not the primary cause of the problem. Another technique is to use scapegoating, identifying a convenient individual or group to shoulder the blame regardless of their actual involvement. This is commonly seen in hierarchical systems, where those at the bottom are often made to answer for the mistakes of those at the top. The impact of blame shifting can be devastating, both on an individual and organizational level. On a personal level, the target of blame shifting experiences feelings of anger, resentment, and injustice. Their reputation may be damaged, their confidence eroded, and their relationships strained. In extreme cases, constant blame shifting can lead to anxiety, depression, and a sense of learned helplessness. Consider a scenario where a child consistently blames their sibling for their own misdeeds. Over time, the sibling may begin to internalize this blame, developing a negative self-image and a belief that they are inherently flawed. In the workplace, blame shifting creates a toxic environment of distrust and fear. Employees are reluctant to take risks or admit mistakes, fearing they will be scapegoated. Innovation is stifled, collaboration breaks down, and morale plummets. When accountability is absent, problems are rarely addressed effectively, leading to repeated failures and a decline in overall performance. If a company consistently blames external factors, e.g., the economy, competitors, for its problems instead of addressing internal issues, it will be unable to adapt and improve. Ultimately, blame shifting is a corrosive force that undermines trust, erodes accountability, and hinders growth. Recognizing the tactics employed by blame shifters and understanding the psychological mechanisms that drive this behavior is crucial for protecting oneself and fostering a culture of responsibility and ownership. Hoovering. The name itself evokes a sense of relentless suction, a vacuum relentlessly trying to pull something, or rather, someone, back into its grasp. And that's precisely what it is. A manipulation tactic employed by individuals, often those with narcissistic or manipulative tendencies, to reel a former target back into a relationship they've previously escaped or been discarded from. Think of a vacuum cleaner tirelessly circling a speck of dust, refusing to let it settle. That's the essence of hoovering. It's not necessarily about genuine remorse or a sudden change of heart. It's about control. It's about proving they still have influence over you, that they can still elicit a response, that you're still within their orbit. The mechanisms of hoovering are varied and often insidious. They can range from seemingly innocuous messages, a casual, "How are you?" or a reminiscing about a shared memory, to more dramatic displays. These might involve feigned illness, fabricated emergencies, or even reaching out to mutual friends to relay messages of regret or longing. The key is to exploit any remaining emotional vulnerability to poke at the wounds that haven't fully healed. Why does it work? Because even after extracting yourself from a toxic relationship, remnants of emotional connection often linger. Hope, however misguided, might still flicker. The victim might remember the good times, downplaying the abuse or trauma they endured. They might feel guilt, believing they somehow contributed to the relationship's demise. Hoovering preys on this vulnerability. Imagine this scenario. Sarah finally breaks free from a relationship with Mark, a man who consistently undermined her confidence and isolated her from her friends. After months of agonizing self-doubt and emotional manipulation, she manages to cut contact. She starts rebuilding her life, rediscovering her passions, and reconnecting with loved ones. Just as she starts to feel a sense of normalcy, a text message arrives. "I know I messed up, Sarah. I've been going to therapy. I'm a changed man. Can we just talk?" This is classic hoovering. Mark is attempting to re-establish contact, to exploit Sarah's potential empathy and hope for reconciliation. Another example might be a situation where someone threatens self-harm if the target doesn't return. This is an extremely manipulative and dangerous form of hoovering, leveraging the victim's fear and sense of responsibility. Or perhaps the abuser begins spreading rumors and lies about the target, aiming to damage their reputation and isolate them, making them more vulnerable and likely to seek solace, however misguided, in the arms of their abuser. The impact of successful hoovering can be devastating. It throws the victim back into the cycle of abuse, reinforcing the manipulator's control and eroding their self-worth. It can undo months, even years, of healing and self-discovery. Each successful hoovering attempt strengthens the abuser's belief in their power and makes it even harder for the victim to break free in the future. It is a reinforcement of the victim's belief that they are somehow responsible or that they can fix the abuser, a dangerous illusion that perpetuates the cycle. Recognizing hoovering is the first step in resisting it. Understanding that these attempts at contact are not driven by genuine remorse, but by a desire for control is crucial. Setting firm boundaries, cutting off all communication, and seeking support from friends, family, or a therapist are essential strategies for protecting yourself and maintaining your hard-won freedom. Consider a romantic relationship as a prime example. An individual, perhaps with a history of infidelity or commitment issues, might declare they've changed, promising marriage, a house in the suburbs, and children. They might even go into excruciating detail, describing the nursery decor or the kind of dog they'll get. This elaborate fantasy isn't intended as a genuine expression of future intention. Instead, it's a tactical play designed to dissuade the other person from leaving or from demanding actual behavioral change in the present. It offers the illusion of security and progress while allowing the manipulator to continue their problematic behaviors unchecked. The impact of future faking can be devastating. It creates a profound sense of betrayal and disillusionment when the promised future inevitably fails to materialize. The victim may have made significant sacrifices based on these false promises, investing emotional energy, time, and even financial resources into a relationship or situation that was fundamentally fraudulent. They might have turned down other opportunities, isolated themselves from supportive relationships, or compromised their own values in anticipation of the promised future. The insidious nature of future faking lies in its ability to erode the victim's sense of reality. Over time, the disparity between the idealized future and the bleak present can create cognitive dissonance, leading the victim to question their own perceptions and judgment. They might rationalize the manipulator's behavior, clinging to the hope that the promised future is still attainable, even in the face of mounting evidence to the contrary. This can create a cycle of dependency and manipulation, where the victim remains trapped in the relationship, desperately seeking validation and reassurance that never comes. Future faking isn't limited to romantic relationships. It can occur in professional settings, where a boss might promise a promotion or a raise that never materializes, or in familial relationships, where a parent might promise financial assistance or emotional support that is consistently withheld. The common thread is the use of future promises as a tool to control and manipulate another person's behavior in the present. The promises act as dangling carrots, keeping the victim engaged and compliant, while the manipulator avoids accountability for their actions. Recognizing the pattern of future faking is crucial for protecting oneself from its damaging consequences. It demands a careful assessment of behavior versus words, and a willingness to confront the painful reality that the promised future may be nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. Gaslighting and memory manipulation represent a particularly insidious form of psychological abuse. It's not simply about lying. It's about systematically eroding a person's grasp on reality, making them question their sanity and their ability to trust their own memories. The ultimate goal is control, achieved by destabilizing the victim's self-perception. At its core, gaslighting involves a persistent denial of the victim's experiences. It starts subtly, perhaps with the abuser dismissing their feelings. You're overreacting, or you're too sensitive. This seeds doubt. Over time, the gaslighter escalates, actively denying things that happened, distorting events, and outright fabricating incidents. They might say, "That never happened," even when confronted with undeniable proof, or claim, "You're remembering it wrong." The mechanism behind this manipulation is multi-layered. Firstly, the gaslighter isolates the victim, often subtly discouraging them from seeking external validation. This could involve creating conflict with friends and family, poisoning relationships with gossip, or simply monopolizing their time, making it difficult for the victim to maintain outside perspectives. Isolated, the victim becomes increasingly reliant on the gaslighter's version of reality. Secondly, gaslighting leverages the victim's inherent desire to believe and trust. Most people enter relationships with a baseline assumption of good faith. The gaslighter exploits this, initially presenting themselves as reasonable and trustworthy. This makes the victim more likely to accept their subtle distortions, especially if the gaslighter frames their narrative as being for your own good. Memory manipulation is the sharpest edge of gaslighting. It goes beyond simply denying an event. It actively replaces the victim's memory with a false one. For example, imagine someone confides in their partner about a past trauma. A gaslighting partner might initially feign empathy, but then subtly begin to plant seeds of doubt about the accuracy of the victim's recollection. "Are you sure that's how it happened? You were so young. Your memory could be unreliable." Over time, they might introduce alternative, self-serving narratives, effectively rewriting the victim's personal history. Maybe you misinterpreted his intentions, or perhaps you're exaggerating the severity of the situation. A hypothetical but illustrative example. A woman, Sarah, is consistently told by her husband, Mark, that she forgets things. He misplaces her keys, then insists she was the one who put them there. He makes plans and then denies making them, making Sarah feel confused and unreliable. He'll say things like, "You're always losing things. I have to take care of everything." Then, Mark begins to subtly alter Sarah's memories of past events, claiming she acted irrationally at a party, even though she has a clear recollection of being calm and collected. He might even involve other people, asking them leading questions designed to reinforce his fabricated version of events. Over time, Sarah begins to doubt her own sanity and starts to rely entirely on Mark's perception of reality. This makes her increasingly vulnerable and dependent. The impact of gaslighting and memory manipulation can be devastating. Victims often experience anxiety, depression, confusion, and a profound loss of self-worth. They may develop a deep-seated fear of making decisions, trusting their instincts, or expressing their opinions. The erosion of their sense of self can lead to social isolation, professional setbacks, and even suicidal ideation. Rebuilding trust in themselves and others after experiencing gaslighting is a long and arduous process, often requiring professional therapy. Understanding the mechanics of this insidious form of abuse is crucial for both identifying it in our own lives and helping others who may be victims. Scapegoating, the convenient target. It's a deeply ingrained human tendency, a psychological mechanism where blame for problems, frustrations, or failures is directed towards an individual or group, regardless of their actual culpability. Think of it as a psychological pressure valve, releasing pin-up anxieties and deflecting responsibility away from the true sources of the issue. It's a dangerous shortcut, trading genuine problem-solving for the temporary comfort of a designated villain. The core of scapegoating lies in the need to alleviate cognitive dissonance. When confronted with negative outcomes, especially collective ones, individuals experience discomfort, the dissonance between their desire for positive results and the reality of failure. Accepting responsibility, analyzing complex causes, and implementing difficult solutions are challenging and often require acknowledging one's own shortcomings. Scapegoating offers a far simpler, albeit unethical, escape. By identifying a target, blame is externalized, the feeling of discomfort is reduced, and the illusion of control is restored. It's not our fault, it's their fault. The mechanisms at play are multifaceted. Prejudice and pre-existing biases often pave the way. Groups already marginalized or viewed with suspicion are prime candidates. The scapegoat doesn't necessarily have to be guilty. They simply need to be perceived as different, weak, or convenient symbol of the problem. This pre-existing negativity acts as a confirmation bias, leading people to selectively notice and interpret information in a way that reinforces the scapegoat's supposed guilt. Another key element is group dynamics. In situations of collective stress or crisis, the pressure to conform increases. Challenging the scapegoating narrative risks ostracism, making individuals hesitant to speak out even if they recognize the injustice. This creates a self-perpetuating cycle of blame, as the scapegoat becomes increasingly isolated and vulnerable. The dynamic often empowers a vocal minority to drive the narrative, as others passively accept or even actively participate to avoid becoming the next target. Examples abound, both historically and in contemporary society. Consider a company facing financial difficulties. Instead of honestly assessing flawed business strategies or poor leadership, the blame might be shifted onto a specific department, a particular employee, or even a recent policy change. The scapegoated entity becomes the fall guy, absorbing the criticism and allowing others to avoid scrutiny. The actual problems remain unaddressed, and the underlying issues fester, potentially leading to further failures. On a larger scale, scapegoating is often seen during times of economic hardship or social unrest. Immigrant communities, for instance, are frequently targeted with accusations of stealing jobs or draining resources, diverting attention from systemic inequalities and complex economic factors. This not only perpetuates harmful stereotypes and discrimination, but also hinders the development of effective solutions to the actual problems facing society. The focus is diverted from addressing the root causes of poverty or unemployment, instead focusing on perceived external threats embodied by the scapegoated group. The impact of scapegoating is devastating. For the targeted individual or group, it results in unfair blame, social isolation, discrimination, and often severe psychological distress. It can erode their self-esteem, sense of belonging, and overall well-being. Furthermore, scapegoating undermines trust within communities and organizations, creating a climate of fear and suspicion. Most significantly, it prevents genuine problem-solving. By focusing on a false cause, the real issues are ignored, and the underlying problems remain unresolved, potentially worsening over time. This makes recognizing and actively combating scapegoating crucial for fostering healthy, equitable, and resilient societies. Creating a false sense of urgency, often referred to as the pressure cooker, is a potent psychological manipulation technique that preys on our innate aversion to loss and desire for gain. It involves artificially inflating the perceived importance of immediate action, overriding rational decision-making processes, and coercing individuals into making choices they might otherwise reconsider. At its core, the pressure cooker exploits the principles of scarcity and loss aversion. Scarcity suggests that things perceived as limited become more desirable. Loss aversion, a cornerstone of behavioral economics, highlights the fact that we feel the pain of a loss more intensely than the pleasure of an equivalent gain. When these two forces converge under the banner of act now or miss out, the psychological pressure can be immense. The mechanism of the pressure cooker typically unfolds in several predictable stages. First, the manipulator creates a perceived limited window of opportunity. This can manifest as a limited-time offer, a dwindling supply, or a threat of imminent price increase. Phrases like limited stock available, offer ends tonight, or prices rising soon are classic indicators. Second, the manipulator amplifies the potential negative consequences of an action. They paint a vivid picture of what the target will lose if they fail to act immediately. This could be missing out on a significant discount, losing access to a valuable resource, or suffering some other form of detriment. The emphasis shifts from the potential gain of acting to the potential loss of not acting. Third, the manipulator minimizes the time available for deliberation. They deliberately truncate the decision-making process, making it difficult for the target to gather information, compare alternatives, or seek advice. This can involve creating distractions, interrupting inquiries, or simply rushing the target through the process. The goal is to prevent rational analysis and encourage impulsive action. Consider a hypothetical scenario. A door-to-door salesperson arrives offering exclusive home improvement services. They claim that because a crew is already working in the neighborhood, they can offer a significantly reduced price, but only if the homeowner signs a contract within the next hour. They emphasize that this is a one-time opportunity and that the price will double if they return later. They might even create social proof by pointing to other satisfied customers in the area. The homeowner, feeling rushed and fearing the loss of a significant discount, might succumb to the pressure and sign the contract without properly researching the company or obtaining alternative quotes. This is a textbook example of the pressure cooker in action. The impact of this technique can be significant. It can lead to poor financial decisions, impulsive purchases, compromised personal boundaries, and even feelings of regret, anxiety, and anger. Furthermore, because the decision is made under duress, the target may later feel exploited and resentful towards the manipulator. The pressure cooker isn't limited to sales tactics. It can be employed in interpersonal relationships to manipulate someone into making a quick commitment or divulging information they wouldn't normally share. A manipulative partner might claim they're about to lose it if they don't receive an immediate answer about the future of the relationship, forcing the other partner to make a premature decision. Similarly, in negotiation settings, creating a deadline to force an opponent to quickly concede ground is a common, albeit ethically questionable, tactic. Recognizing the signs of the pressure cooker is crucial for protecting oneself. Be wary of any situation where you feel rushed, pressured, or unduly influenced by the fear of missing out. Take a step back, seek objective information, and resist the urge to make a decision without careful consideration. Remember, a legitimate opportunity will still be available after you've had time to properly evaluate it. Playing the martyr, suffering for attention. At its core, it's a manipulative strategy, often unconscious, where an individual positions themselves as a perpetual victim to garner sympathy, validation, and control. It's about exploiting the inherent human compassion for suffering, weaponizing vulnerability to navigate social dynamics. The martyr isn't necessarily fabricating hardship, but they are amplifying it, highlighting their sacrifices and perpetually reminding others of their perceived burdens. The mechanism behind this behavior is complex, rooted in deep-seated needs for attention and validation. Often, individuals who play the martyr have experienced neglect, a lack of emotional support, or even trauma in their past. Consequently, they learn that exhibiting suffering is the most reliable way to attract the care they crave. It becomes a learned pattern, a coping mechanism, however maladaptive. Think of the office worker, Sarah, who constantly laments about her overflowing workload. While everyone is busy, Sarah goes above and beyond to showcase her exhaustion, making sure everyone knows she stayed late, skipped lunch, and is single-handedly keeping the department afloat. She might accept additional tasks, not out of genuine altruism, but to further solidify her position as the indispensable, suffering employee. This isn't about efficient work. It's about theatrical performance, designed to elicit praise and acknowledgement. Or consider a parent who constantly reminds their children of all the sacrifices they've made. I gave up my dreams for you. Or after all I've done, this is how you repay me? These phrases are not simply expressions of frustration. They are calculated attempts to instill guilt and control behavior. The child is then pressured to conform, not out of love or respect, but out of a desire to alleviate the parent's perceived suffering. The martyr parent effectively weaponizes their past choices to manipulate the present. The martyr often displays a selective memory, focusing on past injustices and perceived slights while conveniently forgetting any positive experiences or support they received. They might exaggerate the severity of their problems, blowing minor inconveniences out of proportion to maintain their victim status. They also tend to resist genuine help or solutions, because solving the problem would dismantle their carefully constructed narrative. Receiving actual support threatens their identity as the suffering soul. The impact of playing the martyr can be devastating on relationships. Those around the martyr often feel emotionally drained, manipulated, and resentful. Constantly being subjected to complaints and guilt trips erodes empathy and creates a toxic environment. Over time, friends and family may distance themselves, unable to cope with the constant negativity and emotional burden. The martyr, ironically, may then interpret this distancing as further proof of their victimhood, reinforcing their behavior in a self-fulfilling prophecy. Furthermore, playing the martyr prevents genuine self-reflection and personal growth. By focusing on external validation and blaming others for their problems, the individual avoids taking responsibility for their own actions and choices. They remain stuck in a cycle of suffering, unable to break free and build healthy, reciprocal relationships. Their focus remains outward, seeking sympathy rather than inward, seeking solutions. Recognizing this behavior, both in oneself and others, is crucial. If you suspect you're playing the martyr, exploring the underlying need for attention and validation through therapy can be incredibly beneficial. Learning to express needs directly, developing healthy coping mechanisms, and practicing self-compassion are essential steps towards breaking free from this destructive pattern. If you're dealing with someone who plays the martyr, setting boundaries, refusing to engage in guilt trips, and encouraging them to seek professional help are crucial for protecting your own emotional well-being. The key is to acknowledge the manipulative nature of the behavior without necessarily demonizing the individual, understanding that it often stems from deep-seated insecurity and unmet needs. The power of suggestion. It's a subtle art, a delicate dance of influence where we subtly steer another person's thoughts, feelings, and even behaviors without them realizing the extent of our intervention. Think of it as planting a seed in fertile ground, the seed of an idea, a belief, or desire. If nurtured correctly, that seed can blossom into a fully formed conviction, driving action seemingly born of the individual's own volition. At its core, suggestion works by bypassing the conscious, critical thinking processes of the mind and accessing the subconscious. This is where our deeply held beliefs, ingrained habits, and emotional responses reside. By targeting this subconscious level, we can circumvent rational objections and make our suggestions more readily accepted. The mechanism involves leveraging several psychological principles. Priming, for instance, is a key technique. By exposing someone to certain stimuli, we can subtly influence their subsequent thoughts and actions. Imagine showing someone a series of images related to travel, beaches, exotic foods, maps. This seemingly innocuous exposure can increase their susceptibility to suggestions about taking a vacation, even if they hadn't consciously considered it before. The travel imagery acted as a prime, preparing their mind to be receptive to the idea of travel. Another vital element is authority and credibility. We're more likely to accept suggestions from individuals we perceive as knowledgeable, trustworthy, or powerful. This explains the effectiveness of celebrity endorsements in advertising or the impact of a doctor's recommendation. The perceived authority figure provides a level of validation that diminishes our resistance. Framing also plays a crucial role. The way we present information can significantly alter its perceived impact. Instead of saying, "There's a 20% chance of failure," phrasing it as "there's an 80% chance of success" paints a more positive picture and increases the likelihood of acceptance. The underlying information remains the same, but the framing influences our emotional response and our willingness to embrace the proposition. Real-world examples of suggestion are abundant. Consider the placebo effect in medicine. Patients who believe they're receiving a real treatment, even if they're only given a sugar pill, often experience genuine improvements in their condition. This isn't merely wishful thinking. The power of suggestion triggers physiological changes in the body, demonstrating the profound connection between mind and matter. In marketing, suggestion is a cornerstone technique. Advertisers carefully craft messages that subtly associate their products with desirable emotions and outcomes: happiness, success, attractiveness. They might not explicitly state that their product will make you happier, but the imagery and storytelling subtly plant that seed in your mind. Hypothetically, consider a scenario where a team leader wants to subtly encourage innovation within their group. Instead of directly ordering people to be more creative, they might start by decorating the office space with inspiring artwork and quotes from famous innovators. They might also share articles and podcasts about groundbreaking discoveries during team meetings. Slowly, consistently, they're planting seeds of creativity and innovation, creating an environment conducive to new ideas without ever explicitly dictating them. The impact of successful suggestion can be profound. It can shape opinions, influence decisions, and even alter behaviors. While suggestion can be used for benevolent purposes, such as promoting positive habits or boosting confidence, it's essential to acknowledge its potential for manipulation. Being aware of these techniques can help us become more discerning and protect ourselves from unwanted influence, while also allowing us to use the power of suggestion responsibly in our interactions with others. It is about understanding the fertile ground of the mind and cultivating positive growth, rather than sowing seeds of doubt or discord. Cognitive biases. They're the brain's built-in shortcuts, the mental algorithms that allow us to make rapid judgments and decisions in a complex world. But these very shortcuts, designed for efficiency, can be systematically exploited. Understanding how they work is paramount to recognizing when we're being manipulated. At their core, cognitive biases represent deviations from rational judgment. They arise from our limited processing capacity, reliance on heuristics, mental rules of thumb, and emotional influences. Think of it like this. Our brains are constantly bombarded with information. To avoid overload, we filter, categorize, and simplify, often unconsciously. This simplification, while generally helpful, opens us up to predictable errors in thinking. One incredibly prevalent bias is the availability heuristic. We tend to overestimate the likelihood of events that are easily recalled, often because they are vivid, recent, or emotionally charged. Media coverage frequently amplifies this effect. If news outlets are saturated with stories about shark attacks, people will overestimate the risk of being attacked by a shark, even though statistically, it's far more likely they'll be struck by lightning. A manipulator might exploit this by constantly highlighting negative or positive aspects of a particular choice, thereby biasing your perception of its true risk or reward. Another powerful bias is anchoring. When making decisions, we often rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, the anchor, even if it's irrelevant. A classic example is in pricing. If a product is initially advertised at $500 and then discounted to $250, it seems like a great deal, even if the actual value is closer to $200. The initial $500 price serves as an anchor, making the discounted price appear more attractive. In negotiations, setting the initial offer high or low, depending on your position, can significantly influence the final outcome. The confirmation bias is equally insidious. We have a natural tendency to seek out and interpret information that confirms our existing beliefs, while ignoring or downplaying evidence that contradicts them. This is why people can hold stubbornly to opposing viewpoints, even when presented with the same facts. Political campaigns exploit this bias relentlessly, tailoring their messages to resonate with specific demographics and reinforcing their pre-existing beliefs. It also explains the proliferation of echo chambers online, where individuals are primarily exposed to information that validates their perspectives, further solidifying their biases. Framing effects demonstrate that how information is presented can dramatically alter our choices. A medical treatment described as having a 90% survival rate is perceived more favorably than one described as having a 10% mortality rate, even though they are statistically equivalent. Manipulators can use framing to sway opinions by emphasizing positive aspects or downplaying negative ones, even if the underlying information remains the same. The bandwagon effect plays on our desire to conform. We're more likely to adopt a belief or behavior if we perceive that many other people are doing the same. This is why testimonials and bestseller labels are so effective. It's not necessarily because the product is superior, but because the perceived popularity creates a sense of social proof. Cults and propaganda often leverage the bandwagon effect to create a sense of unity and encourage conformity. Understanding these and many other cognitive biases is the first step toward mitigating their influence. Being aware of our mental shortcuts allows us to critically evaluate information, challenge our assumptions, and make more rational decisions. While we can never completely eliminate bias, recognizing its potential presence empowers us to resist manipulation and navigate the complexities of the world with greater awareness. Creating dependency is a subtle, insidious form of psychological manipulation. It's the art of weaving a web where another person comes to rely on you, not for genuine support and reciprocal care, but for validation, resources, or even their basic sense of self-worth. The manipulator, the puppet master, strategically positions themselves as indispensable, slowly eroding the target's autonomy and self-sufficiency. At its core, creating dependency relies on exploiting vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities might stem from insecurity, past trauma, a lack of self-esteem, or even simple naivete. The manipulator identifies these weaknesses and then carefully constructs a narrative where they're the only ones who can truly understand, protect, or provide what the target needs. The mechanisms employed are varied and often masked by seemingly benevolent actions. One common tactic is overhelping. Instead of empowering someone to solve their own problems, the manipulator swoops in to fix everything, effectively disabling the target's ability to learn and grow. For example, a controlling parent might constantly do their adult child's laundry, manage their finances, and make their decisions, ostensibly to help, but ultimately preventing them from developing independent living skills. Another key strategy is withholding resources or affection. This can be done subtly, through conditional approval or strategically timed silences. The target learns that their access to emotional support, financial security, or even basic necessities is contingent on pleasing the manipulator. This creates a climate of constant anxiety and a desperate need for the manipulator's approval. Imagine a partner who consistently withdraws affection after disagreements, making the other partner feel they need to constantly walk on eggshells to maintain the relationship. Gaslighting, a common tool in the manipulator's arsenal, further reinforces dependency. By distorting reality, questioning the target's memory and sanity, the manipulator undermines their confidence in their own perceptions. This makes the target increasingly reliant on the manipulator's version of events, solidifying their control. You're imagining things, or that never happened, repeated enough, can lead someone to doubt their own sanity and turn to the manipulator for clarity. The impact of created dependency is profound. The target experiences a gradual erosion of their self-esteem and autonomy. They may become isolated from friends and family, as the manipulator subtly discourages outside relationships, further cementing their control. Decision-making becomes paralyzed by fear of displeasing the manipulator. Over time, the target's sense of self becomes intertwined with the manipulator's approval, creating a profound sense of powerlessness. Hypothetically, consider a workplace scenario. A new employee, eager to impress, is quickly taken under the wing of a seemingly experienced colleague. The colleague readily offers help, handling complex tasks and protecting the new employee from criticism. Initially, this seems like a blessing. However, the colleague begins to subtly undermine the new employee's confidence, pointing out minor flaws and making them question their abilities. Soon, the new employee is completely reliant on the colleague for guidance and validation, even for simple tasks. The colleague then uses this dependency to manipulate the new employee, assigning them unwanted tasks and taking credit for their work. The new employee, fearing disapproval and feeling incapable of independent action, complies without question. They have effectively become a puppet on the colleague's strings. Breaking free from this type of dependency requires recognizing the pattern of manipulation, rebuilding self-esteem, and establishing clear boundaries. It is a challenging process, often requiring external support from therapists or trusted friends and family, as the grip of the puppet master can be incredibly strong and deeply ingrained. Pathological lying, also known as mythomania or pseudologia fantastica, isn't just an occasional white lie to spare someone's feelings. It's a chronic behavior characterized by compulsive lying, often without a clear external motivation or benefit. These aren't calculated deceptions for personal gain in the traditional sense. Rather, they're often elaborate and fantastical narratives spun seemingly for the sheer act of fabrication. At its core, pathological lying is about creating an alternate reality, a meticulously crafted tapestry of falsehoods that can become incredibly intricate and difficult to untangle. Unlike a sociopath who lies to manipulate or a con artist who lies for profit, the pathological liar often seems to lie for the sake of lying itself. There might be an underlying psychological need being met, such as seeking attention, admiration, or a perceived sense of control, but the primary driver isn't always readily apparent. The mechanisms behind this behavior are complex and not fully understood. Some theories point to childhood trauma or neglect, where lying became a survival mechanism, a way to cope with difficult circumstances or to create a more desirable persona. Others suggest a potential neurological component, citing studies that have found subtle differences in brain structure and function between pathological liars and non-liars. Specifically, studies suggest increased white matter in the prefrontal cortex, the area associated with higher-level cognitive functions like planning and decision-making. This could potentially facilitate the generation and maintenance of complex lies. Consider, for example, a person who consistently embellishes their professional accomplishments, claiming to have spearheaded major projects that they were only tangentially involved in, or fabricating entire positions they never held. They might weave incredibly detailed stories about these fictional achievements, complete with specific dates, names, and circumstances. While superficially it might seem like they're trying to advance their career, often there's no direct, tangible benefit derived from these lies. They might simply crave the perceived respect and admiration that comes with these fabricated accomplishments. Another example could involve someone constantly exaggerating or inventing illnesses, detailing elaborate symptoms and treatment regimens that are entirely untrue. They might visit multiple doctors, undergoing unnecessary tests, all to maintain the facade of being seriously ill. Again, the motivation isn't necessarily to gain sympathy or disability benefits. It could be a deeper need for attention and care, a distorted way of fulfilling unmet emotional needs. The impact of pathological lying can be devastating, not only for the liar, but also for those around them. Relationships are eroded by distrust and suspicion. Family members and friends may feel betrayed and manipulated. The liar themselves may experience feelings of guilt, shame, and isolation, though they often lack the insight to recognize the true extent of their behavior. Furthermore, the constant maintenance of the lies can become incredibly stressful and emotionally draining. The web of deceit becomes a prison, trapping the liar in their own fabricated reality. It's important to distinguish pathological lying from other forms of deception. While all lying involves intentional misrepresentation, pathological lying stands apart due to its compulsive nature, lack of clear motivation, and tendency to create elaborate and fantastical narratives. It's a complex psychological phenomenon that requires careful assessment and often professional intervention. Feigned ignorance, or the innocent facade, is a particularly insidious psychological maneuver where someone deliberately acts unaware or uninformed to manipulate a situation or gain an advantage. It's the calculated performance of naivete, a strategic dumbing down of oneself designed to disarm, mislead, or provoke a specific reaction from others. The core of this tactic lies in creating a disparity between perceived knowledge and actual knowledge. The individual employing feigned ignorance possesses information, but consciously chooses to present themselves as lacking it. This discrepancy is the key to its manipulative power. By appearing harmlessly uninformed, they can circumvent suspicion, elicit explanations they already know, confirming suspicions or gathering further details, or deflect responsibility for their actions. The mechanism works on several psychological principles. Firstly, it leverages the natural human inclination to correct perceived errors or educate the uninformed. People are often inclined to explain things, particularly when they believe someone is genuinely confused or unaware. The manipulator, under the guise of innocence, prompts this explanatory response, gaining insight or steering the conversation in a desired direction. Secondly, feigned ignorance exploits assumptions about competence and intent. When someone appears ignorant, they are often perceived as less threatening or less capable. This can lead targets to lower their guard, revealing information they might otherwise keep hidden or underestimating the manipulator's true abilities and intentions. Consider a classic example. A politician questioned about a controversial policy. Instead of directly defending or denying involvement, they might respond with something like, "Oh, that policy? I'm not entirely sure I'm up to speed on the specifics. Could you remind me what it entails?" This seemingly innocent request accomplishes several things. It buys them time to formulate a response, allows them to gauge the interviewer's understanding and perspective, and creates an opportunity to shape the narrative later by appearing to be merely echoing the explanation they were just given. They're not explicitly lying, but using the appearance of ignorance to subtly control the interaction. Another example can be found in everyday workplace dynamics. Imagine an employee who intentionally fails to understand instructions, repeatedly asking for clarification or simplification. This might be a genuine misunderstanding, but could also be a calculated tactic to avoid responsibility for a complex task or to burden a colleague with extra work. By playing the role of the incompetent novice, they deflect accountability and shift the workload onto someone else. The impact of feigned ignorance can be significant. It can erode trust, create frustration, and ultimately distort reality. The target may feel manipulated and resentful, even if they can't pinpoint exactly what happened. The constant need to explain or clarify can be draining and time-consuming, diverting resources and energy from more productive endeavors. Furthermore, the long-term use of this tactic can create a climate of suspicion and paranoia, as people become wary of the apparent innocence of others. The manipulator also benefits. They gather information, deflect blame, and exert control over the situation. However, the constant performance of naivete can take its toll. It requires careful attention to detail and a consistent commitment to the facade. Over time, it can also lead to a distorted sense of self, as the manipulator becomes increasingly reliant on deception as a means of navigating the world. Furthermore, if the feigned ignorance is exposed, the consequences can be severe, leading to loss of credibility and damaged relationships. The innocent facade can crumble, revealing the calculating individual beneath. The double bind. It's a psychological trap, a no-win scenario meticulously constructed to induce confusion, distress, and ultimately, a breakdown in communication and self-perception. At its core, it's a conflict between two or more messages, where one message negates the other, leaving the recipient feeling utterly paralyzed. Think of it as a meticulously crafted maze with only dead ends. The key is the inherent contradiction. It's not just about receiving conflicting instructions. It's about the impossibility of fulfilling both simultaneously. Imagine a parent who constantly criticizes their child for being clingy and demanding, yet simultaneously punishes them for seeking independence. The child is caught. If they seek affection, they're deemed needy and suffocated. If they attempt autonomy, they are accused of being cold and ungrateful. There is no escape. They are damned if they do, and damned if they don't. Several crucial elements constitute a true double bind. Firstly, there must be two or more individuals involved, forming a significant relationship where power dynamics are often skewed. The originator of the double bind usually holds a position of authority or emotional importance, making the recipient vulnerable and less likely to challenge the conflicting messages directly. Secondly, two or more contradictory messages are delivered, often on different levels. One message might be verbal, explicit, and direct, while the other is nonverbal, implicit, and perhaps even unconscious. For example, a person might say, "I want you to be independent and make your own decisions," while their tone of voice, body language, and subsequent actions convey disapproval and control. The recipient picks up on both messages, creating a sense of cognitive dissonance and uncertainty. Thirdly, the recipient is unable to comment on the contradiction, to metacommunicate about it. This is a crucial aspect. The person trapped in the double bind is prevented from pointing out the inherent flaw in the communication, often through fear of reprisal or a complex web of emotional manipulation. Any attempt to question the contradiction is met with denial, defensiveness, or further manipulation, solidifying the trap. Finally, the double bind becomes a learned pattern. Repeated exposure to these contradictory messages internalizes the conflict. The individual starts to anticipate the impossibility of pleasing the other person, leading to anxiety, confusion, and a distorted sense of self. They may develop coping mechanisms, such as withdrawal, passive aggression, or a complete shutdown of communication, all of which further reinforce the dysfunctional dynamic. The impact of chronic exposure to double binds can be devastating. It can lead to feelings of helplessness, inadequacy, and a profound sense of disorientation. Individuals may struggle with self-doubt, difficulty making decisions, and an impaired ability to form healthy relationships. In severe cases, it has been linked to the development of mental health conditions like schizophrenia, although this is a controversial and overly simplistic interpretation. Imagine a workplace scenario. A manager tells an employee, "I want you to be innovative and take risks," but then micromanages every aspect of their work, criticizes any deviation from the norm, and punishes perceived failures. The employee is caught in a double bind. They are expected to be creative, yet simultaneously discouraged from actually acting on their ideas. The result is likely to be a demoralized, anxious employee who feels trapped and unable to succeed. The double bind is a subtle yet insidious form of psychological manipulation, a carefully constructed prison of communication that can have profound and lasting consequences. Recognizing its components and understanding its impact is the first step towards breaking free from its grasp. The seed of doubt, injecting uncertainty, is a manipulative tactic rooted in subtly undermining another person's confidence in their beliefs, memories, decisions, or perceptions. It's not about outright denial or aggressive contradiction. It's about carefully planting a tiny seed of uncertainty that, over time, can blossom in a significant self-doubt and dependence on the manipulator. The core mechanism lies in exploiting the inherent human vulnerability of questioning ourselves. We all doubt our memories, sometimes second-guess decisions, or wonder if we perceive something correctly. The manipulator preys on this existing tendency, amplifying it through subtle suggestions and carefully worded questions. Context is crucial. The seed is most likely to germinate in environments of trust or authority. A partner, a parent, a boss, or a charismatic leader. These individuals often hold a privileged position where their words carry extra weight. This perceived credibility makes the victim more susceptible to accepting the planted doubt. The process often begins with seemingly innocuous observations or questions. For instance, instead of directly saying, "You're wrong about that," a manipulator might say, "Are you sure that's how it happened? I seem to remember it differently." Or, regarding a decision, "That's an interesting choice. Are you completely happy with it? Have you considered all the angles?" These questions, while seemingly innocent on the surface, introduce the possibility that the victim's perception or judgment is flawed. The impact can be insidious. Initially, the victim might simply feel a slight unease or a nagging question in the back of their mind. However, as these seeds of doubt accumulate, they can erode the victim's self-assurance. They begin to question their own competence, memory, and judgment, making them more reliant on the manipulator for validation and guidance. This reliance, of course, further strengthens the manipulator's control. Real-world examples are abundant, although often difficult to recognize from the outside. Consider a relationship where one partner consistently undermines the other's career aspirations by subtly questioning their abilities or the viability of their chosen field. "Are you sure you're really cut out for this?" It seems incredibly competitive. Over time, the targeted partner may start to lose confidence and abandon their dreams, effectively giving the other partner more control over their life. In a work setting, a manager might employ this tactic by questioning an employee's decisions, even when they are ultimately successful. "That project worked out, but are you sure that was the best approach? It seemed a bit risky." This constant questioning, even when the outcome is positive, can create a climate of self-doubt and discourage the employee from taking initiative. The seed of doubt can also be applied to manipulate memories, a particularly insidious form of gaslighting. By subtly questioning the accuracy of a past event, the manipulator can create confusion and uncertainty, leading the victim to doubt their own recollections. For example, "Are you positive that's what I said? I don't remember saying that at all." Repeated exposure to these types of statements can warp the victim's memory and create a distorted perception of reality. The effectiveness of this tactic is amplified by the manipulator's ability to maintain a facade of concern or helpfulness. They often frame their questions as being motivated by genuine care or a desire to help the victim avoid mistakes. This makes it harder for the victim to recognize the manipulative intent behind the subtle questioning. Ultimately, the seed of doubt thrives in an environment where the target feels vulnerable, insecure, and dependent. Public shaming, at its core, is the deliberate act of exposing an individual's perceived flaws, wrongdoings, or perceived transgressions to public scrutiny with the intent of inducing shame and, consequently, altering their behavior. It's weaponizing social pressure by leveraging our innate desire for acceptance and fear of ostracism. We are, after all, deeply social creatures. From the earliest tribes to modern society, belonging and social approval have been intrinsically linked to survival and well-being. Public shaming exploits this inherent vulnerability. The mechanism is relatively straightforward. An action is deemed unacceptable by a group, that action is publicized, the individual responsible is identified, and then, through various means, they are subjected to public criticism, ridicule, and condemnation. This can range from online pile-ons and doxing to organized protests and boycotts. The goal isn't necessarily justice or even rehabilitation, though those may be presented as justifications. The primary objective is often to inflict pain and humiliate the target, thereby deterring them, and ideally others, from repeating the offending behavior. Think of the digital era equivalent of the stocks in the town square, except amplified exponentially. A tweet with an insensitive joke, a video showing a moment of poor judgment, a leaked email revealing a controversial opinion. These can all be fuel for the public shaming fire. The online realm offers unprecedented speed and reach, allowing for swift and widespread dissemination of information, regardless of its accuracy or context. This creates a breeding ground for instantaneous judgment and collective outrage. Consider a hypothetical example. A restaurant owner makes a seemingly harmless, but culturally insensitive remark during a local news interview. The clip goes viral. Immediately, social media erupts. Calls for boycotts flood online forums. Review sites are bombarded with negative reviews, regardless of the actual quality of the food or service. The owner receives death threats. Their business suffers. Their reputation is tarnished. They are publicly shamed and, in many cases, financially ruined, all based on a fleeting moment captured on camera. The impact of public shaming can be devastating. Beyond the immediate social and economic consequences, it can lead to severe psychological distress. The constant barrage of negativity can trigger anxiety, depression, and even suicidal ideation. The feeling of being constantly judged and scrutinized can erode self-esteem and create a deep sense of isolation. Victims often experience difficulty trusting others and may withdraw from social interactions altogether. They are essentially trapped in a digital panopticon, forever aware of the watchful eyes of the online mob. Moreover, the effectiveness of public shaming as a behavior modification tool is highly questionable. While it may succeed in silencing dissent or forcing apologies, it rarely leads to genuine remorse or meaningful change. Instead, it often fosters resentment and defensiveness. Individuals who are publicly shamed may double down on their beliefs or actions, viewing themselves as victims of injustice rather than perpetrators of wrongdoing. This can create a cycle of conflict and division, further exacerbating social tensions. The focus shifts from the initial offense to the act of shaming itself, creating a climate of fear and distrust. The underlying issues remain unaddressed, and genuine dialogue becomes impossible. The weaponization of social pressure, in this form, is rarely a solution and often a problem in itself. Isolating the target, cutting off support. It's a chillingly effective tactic in the arsenal of psychological manipulation, and it preys on one of our most fundamental human needs: connection. We are social creatures, wired for belonging. Our relationships provide emotional sustenance, validation, and a crucial reality check. When those lifelines are severed, we become vulnerable, adrift, and far more susceptible to influence. The core concept is brutally simple. Systematically erode the target's connections to family, friends, colleagues, and any other support network. The manipulator aims to create a psychological vacuum, where they become the only source of information, affirmation, and even basic human interaction. This isolation doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process, often disguised under a veil of concern or even love. One common mechanism is sowing seeds of doubt and distrust. The manipulator might whisper insidious suggestions about the target's friends. She seems a bit jealous of you, doesn't she? Or he never really seemed to understand you. These seemingly innocuous remarks, repeated over time, chip away at the target's confidence in their relationships. The manipulator may manufacture conflicts, deliberately creating situations that drive a wedge between the target and their loved ones. They might spread rumors, misrepresent information, or simply exaggerate perceived slights. Another tactic involves monopolizing the target's time and attention. The manipulator demands increasing amounts of their focus, making it difficult for them to maintain their existing social commitments. They might manufacture crises or create situations that require constant attention, effectively trapping the target in a web of dependency. Over time, the target's social life dwindles, replaced by the manipulator's constant presence. Consider a hypothetical example. Sarah is in a relationship with Mark. Initially, Mark is charming and attentive. However, over time, he becomes increasingly controlling. He starts subtly criticizing Sarah's friends, claiming they are a bad influence or don't truly care about her. He expresses concerns about her spending time with her family, suggesting they're overly critical and don't appreciate her. He constantly texts and calls when she is out with others, making her feel guilty and distracted. He engineers situations where Sarah misses important events with her friends and then comforts her, reinforcing the idea that he is the only one who truly understands her disappointment. Gradually, Sarah finds herself spending less and less time with her support network, relying solely on Mark for companionship and validation. The impact of this isolation can be devastating. Deprived of external perspectives and emotional support, the target's sense of self begins to erode. They may start to question their own judgment, their sanity, and their worth. They become increasingly dependent on the manipulator for guidance and approval, trapped in a cycle of abuse and control. The manipulator's version of reality becomes the only reality, and the target loses the ability to think critically or challenge the manipulator's authority. Furthermore, isolation amplifies feelings of anxiety, depression, and helplessness. The target may experience a profound sense of loneliness and despair, feeling trapped and unable to escape their situation. The absence of external support also makes it far more difficult for the target to recognize the manipulation for what it is and to seek help. They may fear that no one will believe them or that they will be judged for their perceived weakness. In essence, isolating the target is a strategic dismantling of their psychological defenses. It's a calculated effort to create a state of vulnerability and dependence, making them far easier to control and manipulate. It's a dark corner of the psychological landscape, highlighting the profound impact our connections have on our mental well-being and resilience. Boundary violations, in the context of psychological mind games, represent a subtle yet deeply corrosive technique. It's not a single dramatic act, but rather a carefully orchestrated campaign of inching closer and closer to previously established limits, eroding them over time until they effectively disappear. This gradual erosion often leaves the victim disoriented, questioning their own judgment and eventually accepting behaviors they would have initially rejected outright. The core mechanism relies on desensitization and normalization. The perpetrator begins with minor, almost imperceptible transgressions. These might involve probing personal questions under the guise of friendly interest, borrowing small items and delaying their return, or subtly criticizing opinions in a seemingly constructive way. The victim, wanting to be agreeable or avoid conflict, may let these initial violations slide. This is the crucial first step. With each unchallenged transgression, the perpetrator tests the waters, pushing the boundary slightly further. The seemingly innocuous question becomes more intrusive, the borrowed item remains unreturned for longer, and the criticism becomes more pointed, albeit still couched in plausible deniability. The victim, now accustomed to the initial level of discomfort, finds themselves facing a new, slightly elevated threshold. They may feel uneasy, but the change feels incremental, making a strong reaction seem disproportionate. This process continues, like a slow drip of water wearing down a stone. The violations escalate in frequency and intensity, each one building upon the previous ones. Eventually, the perpetrator may engage in behaviors that are overtly disrespectful, manipulative, or even abusive, and the victim, whose boundaries have been systematically dismantled, finds themselves surprisingly compliant. They may rationalize the behavior, blame themselves, or simply feel too exhausted to resist. Consider the example of a workplace. A new employee, eager to impress, might readily agree to stay late occasionally to help a senior colleague. Initially, this is a voluntary act of goodwill. However, the colleague might gradually start expecting these late nights, framing them as essential for team success. The occasional late nights become regular, then mandatory, and eventually, the employee is consistently working significantly longer hours without extra compensation or recognition. Any attempt to object is met with guilt tripping, suggestions of incompetence, or even veiled threats to their job security. The employee, initially willing to make small sacrifices, has unknowingly had their work-life balance completely eroded. Another common example is in romantic relationships. A partner might start by jokingly teasing their significant other about minor insecurities. Over time, the teasing becomes more frequent, more personal, and more cutting. The victim, initially brushing it off as playful banter, may find their self-esteem slowly diminishing. The perpetrator then introduces controlling behaviors, such as dictating what the victim wears, who they spend time with, or even how they spend their money. Because the boundary violation began with seemingly harmless teasing, the victim may not recognize the severity of the control until they are completely isolated and dependent on the abuser. The impact of boundary violations extends beyond the immediate situation. Victims often experience feelings of confusion, anxiety, and self-doubt. They may struggle to trust their own instincts, leading to further vulnerability in future relationships. The erosion of personal boundaries can also have a profound impact on their sense of self-worth, leaving them feeling powerless and unworthy of respect. Recovery often requires significant self-reflection, therapy, and a conscious effort to re-establish healthy boundaries. The key is awareness and early recognition of the subtle signs of boundary violation, allowing individuals to assert their limits before the erosion becomes irreversible. Exploiting empathy, using compassion against you. It's a chillingly effective manipulation tactic rooted in our inherent desire to alleviate suffering. The core concept revolves around leveraging your compassionate nature, your ability to understand and share the feelings of another, to achieve a desired outcome, often at your expense. It's not simply appealing to your good nature. It's strategically weaponizing your own kindness against you. The mechanism at play involves crafting a narrative designed to evoke a strong emotional response, primarily pity and concern. This narrative can be real, exaggerated, or even entirely fabricated. The key is that it appears credible enough to bypass your critical thinking and trigger your empathetic response. Once your empathy is engaged, the manipulator subtly, or sometimes overtly, positions themselves as needing your help, support, or resources. The requests are often framed in such a way that refusing feels cruel, insensitive, or even morally reprehensible. Consider a hypothetical scenario. A colleague consistently arrives late to work, missing deadlines, and producing substandard work. Initially, you might attribute it to incompetence or lack of motivation. However, this colleague then starts sharing increasingly personal details about their life. A sick relative, financial struggles, a difficult breakup. The details are carefully chosen to tug at your heartstrings, painting a picture of someone overwhelmed and struggling to cope. Your empathy kicks in. You start covering for them, picking up their slack, and offering emotional support. You justify it to yourself by thinking, they're going through a tough time. I need to be there for them. The manipulator, consciously or unconsciously, has successfully exploited your compassion to avoid accountability and shift their responsibilities onto you. The impact of this manipulation can be far-reaching. On a personal level, you might experience increased stress, burnout, and resentment. You may find yourself sacrificing your own needs, time, and resources to support someone who is ultimately taking advantage of your good nature. Over time, this can erode your self-esteem and leave you feeling drained and used. On a broader scale, the exploitation of empathy can have detrimental effects on relationships and even entire organizations. In a romantic relationship, one partner might consistently play the victim, using guilt and emotional blackmail to control the other. In a workplace, a manipulative employee might feign illness or hardship to avoid challenging assignments or gain preferential treatment. This can create a toxic environment where genuine compassion is met with suspicion and distrust. The effectiveness of this tactic hinges on the manipulator's ability to accurately assess your vulnerabilities. They're skilled at identifying your moral compass, your desire to be helpful, and your fear of appearing uncaring. They then tailor their narrative to exploit these weaknesses, making it difficult for you to resist their requests without feeling guilty or selfish. Furthermore, exploiting empathy often involves a blurring of boundaries. The manipulator may share overly personal information too early in the relationship or consistently overshare their problems, creating a sense of intimacy that isn't genuine. This makes it harder to distance yourself or set healthy boundaries, further enabling the manipulative behavior. Recognizing this pattern is a crucial step in preventing this form of manipulation from taking hold. The ability to discern genuine need from manipulative tactics is paramount to protecting your own emotional and mental well-being. Minimization, downplaying the significance at its heart, is a powerful and insidious psychological tactic designed to reduce the perceived importance of an event, behavior, or emotion. It's about diminishing the impact, severity, or consequences of something, thereby lessening the responsibility or guilt associated with it. It's a subtle art, often employed unconsciously, but can be wielded deliberately as a manipulative tool. Think of it as turning down the volume on reality, making a loud, jarring sound seem like a mere background hum. The core mechanism is to present a situation as less significant than it actually is, either to oneself or to others. This can be achieved through various methods, including justification, rationalization, and simply stating that something isn't that bad. The context in which minimization occurs is crucial. It often arises in situations involving wrongdoing, conflict, or painful emotions. For example, an abuser might minimize their violent actions by saying, "It was just a slap," or "I didn't mean to hurt you that badly." This immediately downplays the physical and emotional harm inflicted, shifting the focus away from their responsibility and toward the perceived insignificance of the act itself. Similarly, someone struggling with addiction might minimize their dependence by saying, "I can stop whenever I want. It's just a social thing." The effectiveness of minimization lies in its ability to alter perception. By reducing the perceived significance of an event, the minimizer aims to control the narrative and influence the emotional response of the target. If someone believes an action is not that bad, they're less likely to feel anger, sadness, or a need for retribution. In the case of the abuser, minimizing the violence aims to prevent the victim from recognizing the severity of the abuse and potentially seeking help or leaving the relationship. Consider a hypothetical scenario in the workplace. Imagine an employee, let's call him Mark, consistently takes credit for his colleague Sarah's ideas during meetings. When confronted, Mark might minimize his actions by saying, "I just rephrased what she said. It's not like I stole her idea." He downplays the significance of taking credit, framing it as a simple matter of rephrasing, thus diminishing the ethical implications of his behavior. He shifts the focus from the act of claiming ownership to the seemingly benign act of rewording. The impact of minimization can be devastating. It can lead to a denial of responsibility, enabling harmful behaviors to continue unchecked. Victims of minimization often experience confusion and self-doubt, questioning their own perceptions and emotional reactions. They might begin to believe that their feelings are exaggerated or that they are overreacting, further empowering the minimizer. This gaslighting effect can erode self-esteem and create a cycle of abuse or manipulation. Furthermore, minimization can hinder personal growth and healing. If someone consistently downplays their own mistakes or shortcomings, they're less likely to learn from them and make positive changes. It can create a false sense of security and prevent individuals from confronting uncomfortable truths about themselves. Similarly, minimizing painful emotions can prevent individuals from processing and resolving underlying issues, leading to chronic anxiety, depression, or other mental health problems. Recognizing minimization is the first step in protecting oneself from its harmful effects. Pay attention to language that downplays the severity of events or emotions. Look for phrases like, "It wasn't that bad," "You're overreacting, it's not a big deal," or "I didn't mean anything by it." Question the motives behind these statements and consider whether they're genuinely intended to offer comfort or to manipulate your perception of reality. Ultimately, trusting your own intuition and validating your own experiences is crucial in resisting the insidious power of minimization. Trivialization, making your concerns seem petty. At its core, trivialization is a potent psychological maneuver designed to diminish the importance of another person's thoughts, feelings, or experiences. It's the art of taking something significant to someone and reframing it as insignificant, inconsequential, or simply not worth the energy it's being given. This isn't just a simple disagreement. It's an attempt to invalidate the other person's reality and perspective. The mechanism behind trivialization often involves subtle shifts in language and tone. Phrases like, "Are you still upset about that?" or "Don't you think you're overreacting?" are classic examples. The italicized words carry the weight of the attack, implying that the person's feelings are not only unreasonable, but also prolonged and excessive. It can also manifest in nonverbal cues, like a dismissive wave of the hand or a patronizing smile, reinforcing the message that the concern is unimportant. One common tactic is to compare the concern to something much larger or more significant. For instance, someone complaining about a minor workplace infraction might be met with, "Well, at least you have a job. Think about all the people who are unemployed right now." While acknowledging broader issues isn't inherently wrong, using them to negate the immediate concern effectively shuts down any possibility of addressing the actual problem. The implication is that the person should be grateful and not complain, regardless of the validity of their grievances. Another method is to focus on the supposed irrationality or emotionality of the person expressing the concern. Saying something like, "You're just being emotional," or "You're taking this way too personally," dismisses the concern as stemming from an unstable emotional state rather than a legitimate problem. This tactic is particularly insidious as it attacks the person's character and credibility, making it difficult for them to be taken seriously. It also plays into gendered stereotypes, where women's concerns are often dismissed as purely emotional, while men are expected to be stoic and rational. The impact of trivialization can be profound and damaging. Over time, it erodes self-esteem and self-worth. When someone's feelings are constantly dismissed, they may begin to doubt their own perceptions and question their judgment. This can lead to feelings of anxiety, depression, and isolation. Furthermore, it can create a power imbalance in relationships, where one person consistently invalidates the other's experiences, leading to a sense of helplessness and dependency. Imagine a scenario where a partner repeatedly comes home late without explanation. When confronted, they might respond with, "It's just 15 minutes, what's the big deal?" Or, "You're always making mountains out of molehills." While the lateness itself might seem minor, the lack of communication and consideration for the other person's time and expectations is significant. By trivializing the concern, the partner avoids taking responsibility for their actions and silences any legitimate complaints. Over time, this pattern can create a deep sense of resentment and distrust within the relationship. The effects are not limited to interpersonal relationships. Trivialization can also occur in professional settings, where employees' concerns about workload, harassment, or discrimination are dismissed as being overly sensitive or simply part of the job. This can create a toxic work environment where employees feel undervalued and unheard, leading to decreased productivity and increased burnout. Recognizing trivialization is the first step towards resisting its power. Acknowledging and validating your own feelings, even when others try to dismiss them, is crucial. Furthermore, setting boundaries and refusing to engage in conversations where your concerns are minimized can help protect your emotional well-being. "You're just too sensitive." It's a phrase casually tossed around, seemingly innocuous, yet wields a surprising amount of psychological power. It's a prime example of invalidating feelings, a subtle yet corrosive mind game where someone's emotional experience is dismissed, denied, or outright rejected. The core mechanism revolves around undermining an individual's perception of reality, making them question their own sanity and emotional responses. The statement itself implies that the problem lies not with the situation, nor with the speaker's actions, but with the recipient's character. It frames sensitivity as a personal failing, a flaw that needs correcting, rather than acknowledging it as a valid response to a given stimulus. This immediately creates an imbalance of power. The speaker positions themselves as the arbiter of appropriate emotional responses, while the recipient is relegated to a position of inferiority, their feelings deemed excessive and unwarranted. Consider this scenario. Sarah confides in her partner, Mark, about feeling hurt by his consistently late arrivals. She expresses that it makes her feel unimportant and disrespected. Mark, instead of acknowledging her feelings, replies with, "You're just too sensitive. I was only 15 minutes late. You always blow things out of proportion." In this instance, Mark isn't addressing the lateness itself or Sarah's feelings about it. He's directly attacking her emotional validity. He's minimizing her experience by framing it as an overreaction, thus absolving himself of any responsibility for his actions. He effectively shifts the blame onto Sarah, making her feel guilty for even expressing her feelings. The impact of such invalidation can be profound. Repeated exposure to this kind of dismissal erodes self-esteem and fosters self-doubt. The individual begins to internalize the message that their feelings are wrong, inappropriate, or simply too much. They may start to suppress their emotions, fearing judgment or ridicule. This can lead to a cycle of emotional numbness, where they become increasingly disconnected from their own internal experience. Moreover, constant invalidation can damage relationships. Open and honest communication requires a foundation of trust and acceptance. When one partner consistently invalidates the other's feelings, it creates a climate of fear and resentment. The invalidated partner becomes hesitant to express their true emotions, leading to emotional distance and ultimately a breakdown in intimacy. They may even begin to question their perception of reality, wondering if they are indeed crazy or too sensitive, as they've been repeatedly told. This self-doubt can then permeate other areas of their life, impacting their confidence and decision-making abilities. Another insidious aspect of this invalidation is its ambiguity. The phrase "too sensitive" is vague and subjective. It provides no concrete guidance on what constitutes an acceptable emotional response. This lack of clarity leaves the recipient feeling confused and uncertain, constantly second-guessing their own reactions. They are left adrift in a sea of uncertainty, struggling to navigate their emotions without the validating anchor of another's understanding. Over time, this form of psychological manipulation can lead to anxiety, depression, and even post-traumatic stress disorder, particularly if the invalidation is coupled with other forms of abuse. Recognizing this pattern, both in oneself and in others, is the first crucial step towards breaking free from its damaging effects. It requires learning to validate one's own feelings, even when others attempt to dismiss them, and seeking out supportive relationships where emotional expression is encouraged and respected. The ability to identify and resist such invalidation is a cornerstone of psychological well-being and healthy interpersonal relationships. Storytelling and narrative control, shaping the truth. It's the art of constructing a version of events, a story, that serves a particular purpose, often to influence perception, manipulate emotions, or obscure uncomfortable realities. At its core, narrative control is about seizing ownership of the dominant storyline. It's about deciding which details are emphasized, which are omitted, and how the overall narrative is framed. The mechanism behind its effectiveness lies in our innate human predisposition to understand the world through stories. We are wired to seek meaning and coherence, and stories provide that structure. A well-constructed narrative bypasses critical thinking by appealing directly to emotions and existing biases. Once a compelling narrative takes hold, it becomes incredibly difficult to dislodge, even in the face of contradictory evidence. Context is crucial. A narrative operates within a pre-existing framework of beliefs, values, and cultural norms. To be truly effective, a narrative must resonate with this framework, either by reinforcing it or subtly reshaping it. Successful narrative control often involves identifying and exploiting existing anxieties or aspirations within a target audience. Consider, for example, the marketing of luxury goods. The story isn't just about the product itself. It's about the lifestyle, the status, the feeling of belonging that comes with owning it. Advertisements paint a picture of sophistication, success, and happiness, implicitly linking those qualities to the product. This narrative control shifts the focus from the product's utility to its symbolic value, creating desire and driving sales. In the political arena, narrative control is a potent weapon. Politicians and their advisors meticulously craft narratives around their policies, their opponents, and themselves. They might portray themselves as strong leaders, champions of the people, or responsible stewards of the economy. Negative narratives are used to demonize opponents, portraying them as out of touch, corrupt, or dangerous. Think of slogans carefully designed to create a simple, easily digestible story. The impact of narrative control can be profound. At an individual level, it can influence our self-perception, our relationships, and our decision-making. A person who consistently hears a narrative of failure might internalize it, leading to low self-esteem and a self-fulfilling prophecy. Similarly, a manipulative partner might use storytelling to gaslight their victim, distorting their reality and eroding their confidence. On a larger scale, narrative control can shape public opinion, influence elections, and even justify wars. The narratives surrounding historical events are constantly being re-evaluated and contested, as different groups seek to assert their version of the truth. Understanding the power of narrative control is essential for critical thinking and media literacy. It allows us to question the stories we are told, to identify the underlying agendas, and to construct our own, more nuanced understandings of the world. We must be wary of accepting narratives at face value, always seeking alternative perspectives and evidence. The ability to deconstruct and analyze narratives is a vital defense against manipulation and a crucial step towards informed decision-making. Information overload, drowning in details. It's a psychological battle fought not with direct confrontation, but with sheer volume. Imagine standing beneath a waterfall, not of water, but of facts, figures, opinions, and demands. That's the essence of information overload. It's a cognitive state where the influx of information exceeds an individual's capacity to process it, leading to impaired decision-making, reduced efficiency, and heightened stress. At its core, information overload isn't just about the amount of information. It's about the relationship between the amount and our processing capacity. A manageable amount of information for one person might be overwhelming for another, depending on their prior knowledge, cognitive skills, and the complexity of the information itself. The mechanism behind this psychological manipulation hinges on a few key principles. Firstly, attention is a limited resource. We can only focus on so many things at once. When bombarded with information, our attention becomes fragmented, jumping from one piece to the next without truly absorbing any of it. This leads to a superficial understanding and a sense of being overwhelmed. Secondly, our working memory, the mental workspace where we hold and manipulate information, has a finite capacity. Trying to cram too much information into it causes a cognitive bottleneck. Older information gets pushed out, making it difficult to synthesize and retain new data. Think of it like trying to pour too much water into a glass. It spills over, wasting the water and making a mess. Thirdly, and perhaps most insidiously, is the inherent human desire to be informed. We fear missing out, leading us to consume more and more information, even when we know it's detrimental. This fear of missing out, or FOMO, is expertly exploited in the digital age, where news feeds and social media platforms are designed to constantly bombard us with updates and notifications, creating a sense of urgency and anxiety. Consider a real-world example, a political campaign. A candidate might intentionally flood the media with a barrage of statistics, accusations, and proposed policies, overwhelming voters with sheer volume. The aim isn't necessarily to persuade with well-reasoned arguments, but rather to create confusion and uncertainty, making it difficult for voters to discern the truth. This can lead to apathy or, worse, a choice based on incomplete or misleading information. Another example exists within corporate negotiations. Imagine a team presenting their proposal. They flood the opposing party with technical specifications, legal jargon, and market analyses, burying the core issues in a mountain of detail. The intention might be to wear down the opposition, make them feel inadequate, and ultimately extract concessions they wouldn't otherwise agree to. The constant filtering and deciphering required to cut through the noise becomes exhausting. The impact of information overload is far-reaching. At an individual level, it can lead to decision fatigue, procrastination, and a feeling of being perpetually behind. It erodes confidence, increases anxiety, and impairs problem-solving abilities. In a professional context, it can lead to decreased productivity, errors, and burnout. In a broader societal context, it can contribute to misinformation, polarization, and a decline in critical thinking. The paradox of choice, amplified by information overload, can leave people paralyzed by options, ultimately leading to dissatisfaction, regardless of the choice made. Drowning in details prevents the emergence of a clear picture, leaving the individual vulnerable and easily manipulated. The very act of attempting to stay informed can, ironically, render them more susceptible to misinformation and manipulation. The human desire to reciprocate is deeply ingrained, almost primal. We feel compelled to return a favor, a gift, or even a perceived kindness. This inherent inclination is the bedrock of the reciprocity trap, a potent psychological mind game that manipulates this very impulse to create a sense of obligation, often disproportionate to the initial gesture. The core mechanism hinges on triggering that automatic tit-for-tat response. Someone performs an act, offering unsolicited assistance, providing a small gift, or even simply sharing personal information, and subtly places you in a psychological debt. This debt, even if you never explicitly agreed to it, generates discomfort. We are social creatures, and owing someone, however minor, disrupts the balance of social interaction. The effectiveness of the reciprocity trap lies in its subtlety. The initial act doesn't necessarily need to be overtly valuable. It's the act of giving, the demonstration of goodwill, that sets the stage. A free sample at a grocery store isn't just about letting you taste the product. It's about initiating a feeling that you should, in turn, purchase something. The small gift subtly nudges you towards feeling obligated to reciprocate by making a purchase. Consider a hypothetical scenario in the workplace. Sarah, a new employee, consistently offers to help her colleagues with minor tasks, even when they haven't explicitly asked. She might offer to fetch coffee, proofread a document, or even just offer encouraging words during a stressful project. While seemingly benevolent, Sarah is subtly building a reservoir of obligation. Later, when she needs a significant favor, perhaps having a colleague cover a crucial presentation on short notice, the accumulated sense of obligation makes it significantly harder for her colleagues to refuse, even if it inconveniences them greatly. They feel pressure to return the favor Sarah has been doling out, despite the imbalance in the scale of the requests. The potency of the reciprocity trap is amplified when the initial gift or favor is perceived as personalized or requiring effort. If someone goes out of their way to do something specifically for you, the feeling of obligation intensifies. This is why personalized gifts, even small ones, are often more impactful than generic ones. The effort invested signals a greater degree of commitment, thus amplifying the psychological pressure to reciprocate in kind. Furthermore, the timing of the initial act is crucial. Offering assistance or a gift when someone is vulnerable or facing a challenge increases the likelihood of the reciprocity trap working. A helping hand during a moment of need is far more memorable and likely to create a lasting feeling of obligation than assistance offered during a moment of ease. The impact of the reciprocity trap can range from harmless, such as buying a product you wouldn't normally consider after receiving a free sample, to significantly detrimental, such as agreeing to a business deal that disadvantages you out of a misplaced sense of loyalty or indebtedness. Recognizing the trap is the first step to neutralizing its effects. Questioning the motivations behind seemingly generous acts and evaluating requests objectively, rather than being swayed by feelings of obligation, are critical defense mechanisms. Learning to politely decline unsolicited favors without feeling guilty can also help prevent falling victim to this powerful psychological manipulation. The illusion of choice, limited options, limited freedom. It's a masterful stroke of psychological manipulation, not because it eliminates choice entirely, but because it curates the options, effectively steering the target towards a predetermined outcome while simultaneously fostering a sense of agency. The core concept hinges on presenting a limited set of options, all of which serve the manipulator's underlying agenda. The target believes they are making a free decision, exercising their autonomy, when in reality, they're simply selecting the lesser of evils, or variations on a theme orchestrated by someone else. The mechanism at play is a subtle hijacking of the decision-making process. Rather than outright coercion or command, which often triggers resistance and suspicion, the illusion of choice bypasses these defense mechanisms. The individual feels in control, therefore less likely to question the framework within which their choice exists. This is particularly potent when the presented options are framed in a way that makes the desired outcome appear the most logical, appealing, or even the only viable solution. Consider a hypothetical negotiation scenario. A used car salesman, intent on selling a particular vehicle, might present two seemingly distinct financing options: a high interest rate with minimal down payment or a slightly lower interest rate with a substantial down payment. The choice isn't whether or not to buy the car, but rather how to finance it. Both options, however, are designed to maximize the salesman's profit. The customer focuses on comparing the two plans, blinded to the possibility of exploring alternative financing through their own bank, or even walking away from the deal entirely. The illusion of choice has trapped them within a predefined box. The impact of this technique is profound. It can erode a person's sense of autonomy, leaving them feeling subtly manipulated and powerless, even if they can't quite put their finger on why. Over time, repeated exposure to such scenarios can lead to a general distrust of authority figures and a diminished sense of self-efficacy. People may begin to second-guess their decisions, wondering if they were truly acting on their own volition or simply puppets in someone else's game. This isn't limited to high-stakes situations. It permeates everyday life. Think about the menu at a restaurant. While seemingly offering a wide array of dishes, the restaurant has carefully curated the selection to optimize profit margins and inventory management. They might offer 3 different steak options, all prepared using the same cut of meat, but with varying sauces and side dishes, subtly guiding you towards the most profitable choice. You believe you're selecting your preferred dining experience, while the restaurant is subtly influencing your spending. In the political arena, the illusion of choice is a well-honed tactic. Voters might be presented with 2 candidates, both ostensibly representing different ideologies, but ultimately adhering to the same underlying corporate interests. The choice becomes a matter of selecting the lesser of 2 evils, reinforcing the status quo and preventing meaningful systemic change. The electorate feels as though they've participated in a democratic process, but their agency has been cleverly constrained. The ethical considerations surrounding the illusion of choice are significant. While it might seem relatively harmless in some contexts, like a restaurant menu, its use in more consequential situations, such as political campaigns or financial negotiations, can have devastating consequences for individuals and society as a whole. Recognizing this technique is crucial for maintaining autonomy and making truly informed decisions. Understanding that the options presented are not necessarily exhaustive, and that genuine freedom lies in exploring alternatives outside the prescribed boundaries, is the key to breaking free from this subtle form of psychological control. Repetition and reinforcement, embedding the message. It's the cornerstone of not only effective advertising and political propaganda, but also a subtle, yet potent, tool in personal psychological manipulation. At its heart, it's a simple principle. The more frequently you hear or experience something, the more likely you are to believe it, internalize it, and ultimately act upon it. This isn't just about mindless parroting. It's about the gradual, often unconscious shaping of thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors. The mechanism is deeply rooted in cognitive psychology. Repetition exploits the brain's natural tendency to prioritize information it encounters frequently. Our brains are wired to conserve energy. If a piece of information keeps recurring, the brain assumes it's important, worth remembering, and likely relevant to our survival or well-being. This leads to a phenomenon known as the illusory truth effect, where repeated statements are judged as more truthful than novel ones, regardless of their actual veracity. The brain essentially equates familiarity with validity. Reinforcement, on the other hand, solidifies the message by associating it with either a positive or negative experience. It's the carrot and stick approach to mental conditioning. Positive reinforcement involves rewarding the acceptance or demonstration of the desired belief or behavior, thereby making it more likely to occur again. This can be as overt as praise and recognition, or as subtle as a shared smile or knowing glance. Negative reinforcement, conversely, involves removing an unpleasant stimulus when the desired behavior is exhibited. This could manifest as the cessation of criticism or the granting of privileges. Consider the advertising world. A catchy jingle, repeated endlessly on television and radio, becomes inextricably linked to a particular product. The jingle itself might be meaningless, but its constant repetition creates a sense of familiarity and positive association. When you're at the store, faced with a choice between several brands, the one with the familiar jingle often feels safer, more trustworthy, even if you consciously know there's no logical reason for it. The message has been embedded through repetition and perhaps even reinforced by the association of the jingle with entertaining commercials. In interpersonal relationships, this technique can be far more insidious. A manipulative partner might repeatedly criticize a person's appearance or abilities, slowly eroding their self-esteem and confidence. The constant negativity, though demonstrably false, becomes internalized over time, leading the victim to believe the criticisms are true. Conversely, a cult leader might shower new recruits with constant praise and affection for expressing agreement with the group's doctrines, reinforcing their adherence and discouraging dissenting opinions. The power of repetition is magnified when it's combined with emotional resonance. A political slogan, repeated endlessly in rallies and online, isn't just a string of words. It's designed to evoke strong emotions: fear, anger, hope, patriotism. The more emotionally charged the message, the more deeply it's etched into the subconscious. This is why propaganda often relies on emotionally manipulative language and imagery. The repetition doesn't just inform. It persuades by bypassing rational thought and appealing directly to the emotions. Ultimately, the key to resisting this form of psychological manipulation lies in awareness. Recognizing the mechanisms of repetition and reinforcement allows you to critically evaluate the messages you're exposed to, question their validity, and avoid being swayed by mere familiarity or emotional manipulation. Consciously seeking out diverse perspectives and actively challenging ingrained beliefs can act as a powerful antidote to the insidious effects of embedded messaging. The appeal to authority, a cornerstone of influence and often manipulation, hinges on our deeply ingrained respect for figures of power, knowledge, or status. It's the psychological shortcut that allows us to bypass critical thinking by deferring to someone perceived as more informed or capable. Blindly following the leader, in this context, becomes not just a matter of obedience, but a suspension of independent judgment. At its core, this phenomenon exploits our inherent social hierarchy and the evolutionary advantage of learning from those who possess expertise or experience. Early humans, for instance, benefited from adhering to the guidance of elders who understood survival techniques. This ingrained predisposition hasn't entirely faded, even as societal structures have evolved. The mechanism is multifaceted. Firstly, perceived authority evokes trust. We tend to believe authoritative figures are knowledgeable and acting in our best interests. This trust, whether earned or manufactured, disarms our skepticism. Secondly, there's the fear of repercussions. Disobeying or questioning an authority figure can carry social, professional, or even legal consequences, creating a strong incentive for compliance. Thirdly, the complexity of modern life often overwhelms us. Faced with intricate information or high-stakes decisions, relying on an expert seems like the most efficient and safest route. The impact is profound. In positive contexts, appealing to authority facilitates efficient decision-making and knowledge transfer. We trust doctors' medical advice, lawyers' legal counsel, and engineers' structural designs because we acknowledge their expertise. However, the potential for abuse is significant. Propaganda frequently leverages this tactic, associating political ideologies with respected figures to garner support. Advertisements often employ celebrity endorsements to sell products, even when the celebrity has no discernible expertise in the product category. The power of a white lab coat in pharmaceutical ads is a classic, if somewhat cliché, example. Real-world examples abound. The Milgram experiment, a chilling demonstration of obedience to authority, revealed how readily individuals would administer seemingly lethal electric shocks to others simply because an authority figure instructed them to do so. This highlights the disturbing potential for authority to override personal ethics and moral judgment. Even seemingly benign scenarios can be problematic. A manager's pronouncements in a workplace, even if lacking factual basis, may be accepted without question simply because of their position, stifling innovation and creating a culture of conformity. Consider a hypothetical scenario. A self-proclaimed guru gains a following by presenting complex scientific concepts in a simplified, albeit inaccurate, manner. They sprinkle their pronouncements with jargon and project an aura of unwavering confidence, convincing followers that they possess superior knowledge. These followers, intimidated by the guru's perceived expertise and lacking the scientific literacy to critically evaluate their claims, blindly accept their teachings, even when those teachings are demonstrably false or harmful. This illustrates how easily people can be swayed by superficial displays of authority and expertise, especially when presented with information that is difficult to independently verify. The critical takeaway is not to dismiss authority entirely, but to approach it with a healthy dose of skepticism. Question assumptions, seek independent verification, and cultivate critical thinking skills. Recognizing our inherent susceptibility to the appeal to authority is the first step in resisting its manipulative potential and ensuring that we are not blindly led down a path of misinformation or unethical conduct. The responsibility for critical evaluation ultimately lies with each individual, regardless of the apparent expertise or authority of the source. The sunk cost fallacy, justifying continued investment. It's a cognitive bias whispering insidious justifications in your ear, urging you to throw good money after bad, pour more time into failing ventures, and cling to relationships long past their expiration date. At its core, it's the tendency to continue investing in something simply because you've already invested so much, even when evidence suggests abandoning it is the most rational course of action. Think of it as a form of mental accounting gone awry. We humans, by nature, are loss-averse. The pain of losing something, be it money, time, or effort, is often perceived as greater than the pleasure of gaining something of equivalent value. The sunk cost fallacy exploits this aversion, amplifying the perceived cost of cutting losses. We reason, subconsciously or consciously, I've already put so much into this. I can't just give up now. That would mean everything I've done so far was for nothing. But here's the catch. Those past investments, those sunk costs, are irretrievable. They are gone. They shouldn't factor into present or future decisions. The only relevant factors are the potential future costs and benefits of continuing versus discontinuing the investment. Yet, The emotional weight of past investments clouds our judgment, obscuring the logical path forward. Imagine you buy a non-refundable ticket to a play for $100. On the day of the play, you feel unwell. Rationally, you should stay home, rest, and recover. However, the sunk cost fallacy kicks in. You think, I spent $100 on this ticket. I can't just waste it. I have to go, even if I feel terrible. The $100 is a sunk cost. Whether you go to the play or not, that money is gone. The only thing that matters now is your well-being. Staying home might be the better decision, even though it means you wasted the ticket money. The mechanism behind this fallacy is multifaceted. Part of it stems from a desire to avoid cognitive dissonance. Admitting that a past investment was a mistake is uncomfortable. It clashes with our self-image as rational decision-makers. Continuing the investment, even if illogical, allows us to maintain the illusion that we knew what we were doing all along. Another factor is the fear of regret. We anticipate the regret we would feel if we abandoned the project and it subsequently succeeded. This fear can be so powerful that it overrides our ability to objectively assess the situation. We become trapped in a cycle of justification, clinging to dwindling hopes and ignoring mounting evidence of failure. This fallacy pervades every aspect of life. In business, it can lead companies to pour millions more into failing projects, refusing to acknowledge that the initial investment was a mistake. In relationships, it can trap individuals in toxic dynamics, clinging to the past and ignoring the present unhappiness. In personal endeavors, it can lead to pursuing degrees or careers that no longer align with our interests or goals, simply because we've already invested so much time and effort. The impact is far-reaching. It leads to wasted resources, prolonged suffering, and missed opportunities. By understanding the mechanics of the sunk cost fallacy, we can begin to recognize its influence on our decisions and break free from its grip. The key is to consciously detach ourselves from past investments, focus on present realities, and evaluate future options with a clear and unbiased perspective. Acknowledging a past mistake, however painful, is often the first step toward making a more rational and ultimately more rewarding decision. Humor, often perceived as a lighthearted social lubricant, can be a surprisingly potent tool in the arsenal of psychological mind games. Its effectiveness in disarming, specifically in joking away concerns, lies in its ability to circumvent logical defenses and directly influence emotional states. At its core, this technique operates by subtly shifting the perceived threat level of a situation or concern, making it seem less significant and therefore less worthy of serious consideration. The mechanism hinges on the release of endorphins and the activation of the brain's reward system triggered by laughter and amusement. This positive emotional response is fundamentally incompatible with anxiety and fear, creating a momentary emotional dissonance. In that window of reduced tension, the concern, even if legitimate, loses some of its perceived urgency and importance. The power of humor stems from its subjective nature. What one person finds funny, another might find offensive or irrelevant. This ambiguity is precisely what allows it to bypass conscious scrutiny. When confronted with a direct challenge or serious question, individuals tend to engage in critical thinking, weighing evidence and considering potential consequences. However, humor, delivered skillfully, sidesteps this process. The immediate goal becomes understanding and appreciating the joke, rather than analyzing the underlying issue. Consider a hypothetical scenario. A manager confronts an employee about consistently missing deadlines. A direct accusation might trigger defensiveness, leading to excuses, justifications, or even outright denial. However, if the manager begins by saying, "I'm starting to think you have a time-bending machine hidden in your cubicle because deadlines seem to exist in a different dimension for you," the employee is momentarily disarmed. The absurdity of the statement, if delivered with genuine humor, creates a brief emotional shift. The employee is more likely to respond with a laugh or a self-deprecating comment, opening a pathway for a less confrontational, more productive conversation about the actual problem. The impact of this technique is multifaceted. Firstly, it fosters rapport. Sharing a laugh creates a sense of connection and common ground, making the target more receptive to influence. Secondly, it deflects attention. The focus shifts from the potentially uncomfortable or threatening subject matter to the humor itself, diverting the individual's mental energy away from critical analysis. Thirdly, it normalizes the situation. By presenting the concern in a humorous light, it implies that the problem is not as serious as it might seem, reducing the emotional intensity surrounding it. However, the ethical implications of this technique cannot be ignored. While humor can be used to diffuse tense situations and facilitate communication, it can also be employed manipulatively to trivialize legitimate concerns, avoid accountability, or silence dissenting voices. When humor is used to dismiss someone's feelings or belittle their experiences, it becomes a form of emotional invalidation, potentially causing significant harm. For example, joking about a colleague's anxiety or downplaying their professional contributions can undermine their confidence and create a hostile work environment. The line between playful banter and harmful manipulation is often blurred, requiring careful consideration of intent, context, and the potential impact on the individual. A crucial factor is the power dynamic. Humor from someone in a position of authority carries significantly more weight and potential for abuse than humor exchanged between peers. Therefore, responsible and ethical use of humor demands self-awareness, empathy, and a genuine desire to build positive relationships rather than exploit vulnerabilities. Feigned vulnerability is a potent and insidious mind game that preys on our inherent human capacity for empathy and compassion. It's a calculated manipulation where someone pretends to be emotionally or physically weak, helpless, or deeply wounded, not for genuine connection or support, but to gain an unfair advantage, control, or access to resources they wouldn't otherwise possess. At its core,